To this evening's Planning Commission meeting. Thank you for coming out. I am going to just make a quick announcement at the top here. It looks like some of you have already filled out cards and brought them up. If you wish to speak on a topic, that's helpful. And they're just outside the door, so you can fill that out and pass it up on either side of the table here, and we'll be sure to get you your time to speak. Let's first start with the approval of the minutes for August 8th, 2018. Do we have a motion?
Mr. Chair, I'll move to approve the minutes.
Thank you, Clark. Motion by Clark.
I'll second.
Second by Maureen. Sarah?
Abstain.
Brenda?
Abstain.
Carolyn? Oh, Carolyn's not here yet. Sorry. Amy?
Actually never got the minutes in my Dropbox, so I will also abstain.
Oh. Really? Matt?
Yes.
Maureen?
Yes.
Clark?
Yes.
Andreas?
Yay.
Is that
Yes.
enough? Okay. All right. We passed those minutes. Report from Chair and Vice Chair. I don't have anything to report. Do you, Maureen?
No.
All right. We'll go to Nick.
I'm going to first start. You guys all know of some of the upcoming pending Planning Commission meetings that we have. It's really important that we stay on top of whether or not we have a quorum. Right now for the September 12th, we barely have a quorum. So if anybody else can't make it, we'd have to cancel that meeting, which is going to severely impact a couple of pressing issues plus our future agendas, because all those things would have to be pushed to other agendas. So I think having that open communication, and if you think something's going to come up, let us know as soon as possible so we can adjust as necessary. Second, just some updates on some activity that's happening with the City Council on some items that went through the Planning Commission. They've held a number of public hearings on things last night. They approved a zoning map amendment that was on 900 East and in between South Temple and 100 South. Can't remember the details of that. It was a split zone property. It was just making them all the same, I think. And then the other items, they had public hearings on the state law code changes related to appeals of Historic Landmarks Commission decisions, which we have to do to be in compliant. They haven't adopted that yet, but there were no real comments on that. The text amendment to fix oversight in the mixed-use zoning district to add the retail services back in that were somehow erroneously left out when we made a sweeping, when we redid our land use tables 5 or 6 years ago. So that is expected to pass too. There was no opposition that we've heard to that. And then clarifying some language in the design standards about making sure that design standards apply to existing structures as well, so that once something's approved, they can't come back and block in windows and things like that. So those are pending at the City Council. Hopefully at their next meeting, they'll make a decision on those. They also will be taking up the discussion on the briefing, it looks like, on ADUs on September 4th. So we'll keep you posted on that. The hiccup there is that I actually have to go to jury duty that week, so I might not be able to attend the City Council meeting, so that may delay that to the following week. But that's all I have.
Okay. Thank you very much. All right. We will go to our first item on for our public hearings. This is the Sugar House Heights Plan Development and Preliminary Subdivision at 2660 South Highland Drive, with Ashley presenting. Thanks, Ashley.
All right. So this is a request made by David Desso, the developer, for plan development and preliminary subdivision approvals to construct 4 new single-family homes on 4 new lots, which would be accessed by a new private driveway at 2660 South Highland Drive. Plan development approval is required as 2 of the lots would not have frontage on a public street, but beyond this, the applicant has not requested any other type of relief from the zoning ordinance. I did want to point out quickly that this petition was submitted under the former plan development ordinance, so we did consider the project against those objectives and standards and not the ones that are currently in place. So as you can see here on this aerial, the subject property at 2660 South Highland Drive consists of one parcel that measures just under half an acre in area, and it currently contains one single-family home that is oriented towards Highland Drive. The parcel currently has 2 vehicle access points. One is a private driveway that stems off of Highland Drive, and another private driveway at the back of the lot that comes off of Caton Way. Caton Way is a private roadway directly to the south of the site that was constructed to serve the existing planned unit development to the south and west of the subject property called the Highlands of Sugar House. I did also want to point out that if you can see on that zoning map, the parcels directly to the south are zoned CN, neighborhood commercial. These are active commercial uses. Directly to the south of Caton Way is kind of a strip mall development with surface parking, and there are 3 more commercial structures that go the whole way to the intersection at 2700 South. So this is just a Google Earth aerial. I thought it was more helpful to kind of see surrounding development pattern. You can see the 2 access points at the front and kind of side off of Caton Way to the property, and that planned unit development that's to the south and to the west. So here are just some site photos. The top photo is the existing single-family structure on site. This home was rated as contributing to the Highland Park National Historic District, but it is not located in a local historic district, so the city doesn't have any authority to protect it from demolition. The bottom left of the photo is the strip mall that's directly to the south, and the bottom right photo is the small bungalow that's directly to the north. And then these are just some photos of development directly across the street. There's 2 single-family bungalows, and there are 2 multifamily structures. So this is the site plan for what's being proposed. Again, it's a plan development request because the 2 rear lots away from Highland Drive don't have frontage on a public street. The proposed lots range in area from about 5,000 square feet to 6,000 square feet. I did add the red dashed lines to kind of show you where they're proposing to break out the property lines for each lot. It does include the construction of a new private driveway that comes off of Caton Way and bisects the site, and then there'll be 4 individual driveways that lead to 2-car garages that are proposed for each home. Guest parking could be accommodated in those individual driveways, or you are allowed to park on the street on Highland Drive in that area. The homes proposed for lots 1 and 2 would have direct pedestrian access to the sidewalk on Highland Drive from the doors that are along Highland Drive. They're also proposing a sidewalk strip to connect lots 1 and 2 to Caton Way. Caton Way does not currently have a sidewalk, and then I'm not seeing any sidewalk connections from the homes on lots 3 and 4. And the applicant is proposing to have the homes oriented inward toward the private driveway, which is something I'll discuss more in a minute. But I wanted to point out that despite this orientation, the outermost setback designation for this property as a whole are the same as they would be if the developer were only constructing 1 home on the site. So the yards that abut Highland Drive, by definition, are front yards. And then the rest of the lots are configured in a way that side yards and rear yards are where you would expect them to be. So when it comes to the specific designs for the homes, the applicant is proposing to construct 4 2-story homes with attached 2-car garages. They are modern in design with minor variations between each of them. All the structures have flat roofs, and they each have a large pitched roof form located towards what I'm calling the functional front of the home. The pitched portions are limited to 28 feet in height, and the flat roof portions are limited to 20 feet in height. The submitted plans show that they'll be mainly made of stucco with areas of wood siding for accenting purposes. The full plan set is included in the staff report, and I have them loaded on this computer as well if you'd like to see any other elevations. This slide shows the elevations that would be most visible from Highland Drive. So because the homes are being oriented internally toward that private driveway, the functional rear of the homes on lots 1 and 2 end up fronting Highland, And then the actual front elevations of the homes on lots 3 and 4 can be seen from Highland, but they'd be set back behind the other two. So the top 2 elevations here would be closest to Highland Drive. The bottom elevations would be set back behind. And the orientation of the homes on lots 1 and 2 that have frontage on Highland Drive is highlighted as a key consideration in the staff report. Staff finds that the proposal supports elements of the Sugar House master plan, but also conflicts with some policy statements that relate to compatibility with the surrounding neighborhood and the orientation of houses so that they face the street. In addition, the purpose statement of a planned development indicates it will result in a more enhanced product than would be achievable through strict application of land use regulations, while enabling the development to be compatible with adjacent and nearby land developments. So to better comply with these 2 items, staff strongly encourage the applicant to orient the homes with frontage on Highland Drive toward the street during reviews of the project. And you can see on this slide, the revised elevations being proposed tonight are an improvement on what was initially proposed, but they still appear to be the rear elevations of the homes. So in an effort to address this, staff is recommending conditions of approval that would require the applicant to modify the street fronting elevations to include architectural features typically found on the front facade of a single-family home, such as enhanced entryways with usable porch features, prominent front entry doors, window patterns, and configurations that are more appropriate for a prominent street-facing facade, and the use of more articulation in the building wall or additional building materials to increase visual interest. We are asking for final design details to be delegated to staff on that. We also recommended a condition that this kind of just affirms that the eastern yard areas of lots 1 and 2 against Highland Drive will be considered the front yards of the lots for the purposes of designating yards. The main purpose of this is to ensure that any future fencing would comply with height limitations for fences in front yards. So it would be limited to 4 feet in height rather than being able to have a 6-foot fence on Highland Drive. So staff is recommending that the Planning Commission approve the plan development and the preliminary subdivision petitions as proposed, subject to regulations and conditions of approval listed in the motion sheet.
Great. Thanks, Ashley. I really appreciate the staff recommendations with the in relation to the porch. I think that's really listening to some of the comments that we've had on projects that have new buildings towards face towards streets with other buildings inside. Can you speak to the historic preservation component real fast related to the plan development? And I know that one of the criteria is preserving any historical, architectural, and environmental features of the property. And on the staff report, it says that the interpretation of that is that because this is a national historic district and it's not a local historic site, building, or district, that staff doesn't see it as a contributing home in that nature. Is that a staff interpretation, or is that a legal interpretation, or where does that sit? Is that something that we could also make a judgment on here, or has that judgment been made?
I think that's a staff interpretation, but I think it's mainly because we don't have the authority to prevent demolition of a structure that's in a national historic district. Our ordinances give us the authority to, prevent demolition of contributing structures in a local historic district. We didn't create a local historic district in that area, so.
So the standard requires that there is some sort of local designation versus just the interpretation of the commission or whatever. It requires an official designation of some sort.
Yeah, so that's correct.
Okay.
Because our ordinance doesn't distinguish, what historic means outside of a local historic district, then that's what we have to go off of. And so by definition in the zoning ordinance, a historic structure is one that is part of a local historic district or a landmark site as designated by the city.
And it cannot be our interpretation that we believe it to be a historic structure and important to the community.
then we start getting into property rights issues. I mean, granted, this is a planned development, and there are no guarantees with that, but we kind of open the door about loose interpretations of what certain terms in our code mean.
Okay.
The developer could demolish this structure independently of this process, right?
That's correct.
So he could demolish it and then come back, and there would be no historical structure for us to consider in this process.
So to demolish a structure in the city, you have two options. You either have to have an approved reuse plan, or you have to basically bond for future landscaping on the site. And so in a situation where somebody wants to demolish a home, they could come back and submit a pretty generic single-family home on the property that could be approved through the building permit process, and that would satisfy an approved reuse plan, and then just never build it.
Any other questions for staff before we listen to the applicant?
Could they build 3 lots on this property, with not just a 4th, without going to the plan development? I mean, could they tear the house down, put 3 lots as long as the 2 faced on Highland and the 3rd one faced on the street? Lot 4 just couldn't be built. Could they do that without a plan development process?
No, so Highland Drive is the only public right-of-way. So due to lot width requirements, they could have a maximum of 2 lots with 2 single-family homes that front Highland.
So Caton Way is a private street as well?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, ready for applicant? Okay. We'll go ahead and have the applicant come on up. And just give us your names, and then we give 10 minutes to our applicants to let us know their plans.
Thanks, Ashley. I'm David Desso. With me is Adam Breen, will be business partner and principal builder on the project. Adam, where do you want to start?
Yeah, just to not rehash the development again, but to go through maybe a couple of the concerns. The reason we've designed the 4 lots around it, I know it was brought up of if we could get 3. There's not enough frontage on Highland Drive, as that was explained. So it forces either one access off Highland Drive and another private road down to attempt to try to squeeze 3. The lots actually become a little bit more squeezed in, that the setbacks become tighter if we do a north or south private road in. In this situation, we'd end up with a more north private road coming down that side and trying to squeeze 3 lots in, and that the project does not become financially feasible. So the approach of the 4 and access off Caton Way, there is an easement in place that does allow the access of this property off that private drive or that private development that's currently there. A couple other things to discuss. We have had 2 Sugar House Planning Commission or Planning Council meetings to open up and discuss to the public as well. We have talked in lengthy depths with the PUD development, Highlands of Sugar House there, and the access on Caton Way. Currently, some of the biggest frustrations they have is traffic cutting through their PUD to avoid the traffic light that's on Highland Drive. So we've proposed and tried to work with them on putting a gate just past our entrance of property, electronic gate that we would fund and pay for them, that would hopefully relieve complete issues of people trying to cut through that area. Just in ways of trying to be friendly neighbors, because we understand change is hard on everybody. That's one issue that shows up here with where the gate was. Second, where we're at slide-wise here, the original design shows where the current access is, or easement of access off Caton Way. Another issue that was brought up amongst the individuals there was concern of how close our access was getting to their private development, feeling like our headlights and our cars were getting too close to their home. So we discussed with them about trying to move that access a little further east. I think for multiple reasons that serves our community better and serves their community better, of giving us a more straight shot and putting less traffic further down their road, allowing them a little more privacy on that development.
We also added additional parking and an area for a private garbage collection, so we're not rolling our garbage bins down to Caton Way. So that should help.
Right,
Next.
and then, David, why don't you touch, David's a real estate professional here, I'll let him touch on the reason we've gone with the design we have gone on.
So currently, the kind of mountain modern, is kind of Utah's word for it, design is the highest in demand. Obviously, as a real estate professional, we're building these so that somebody will buy them from us and have their family in them. These are two examples of ones we did on Wilson Avenue, probably about a mile away from this proposed development. These are a little bigger than the ones we're proposing, but gives you kind of the same idea of the finishes that we have chosen that people tend to like. And then I skipped ahead, but taking in some of the complaints or suggestions, we have, Ashley went over this, started to make it look more like the front of a house. Our architect, the original plans were definitely the back of a supermarket kind of looking thing. We've added sidewalks that you can't see in the renderings, but are on the site plans. And have plans for a little patio there as well, but anything else on that?
Yeah, well, I think that's fine, unless there's anything else you want to say on it.
No.
Well, yeah, we'll open up to any questions that you might have on it.
So is the picture you just had up, is that taking into consideration the staff's recommendations with the porches and stuff like that, or is that without that recommendation?
That's kind of a beginning start. I know when staff originally came back to us, we had the top original designs in there. We came this back as the first red line set of drafts of some ideas and suggestions we'd get there. But we do recognize that the staff is asking for approval on their level to continue making changes to that.
Okay.
Do you envision any fencing or anything going around the property near Highland Drive, or no?
You know, we've discussed back and forth on fencing going across Highland Drive to create more of that front yard, backyard feel to it. If we did, we'd probably do something a little lower, 4 feet tall and open. We've kind of taken to the approach of wanting the frontage of Highland Drive to feel like the front of those homes. Outside of that, we're open to the suggestion of fencing around to give more privacy to the Caton Way subdivision as well.
This is kind of going over, sorry, my slides didn't come out how they were supposed to. The western homes are pushed to the east side of their buildable plat to give the residents on the backside of Caton Way more privacy. And it looks like...
What is the driving decision to have lots 1 and 2 accessed off of an additional private drive instead of having them accessed off Highland?
Just to turn into more of a private drive and not have so much busyness as you're trying to back in and out of your driveway. It's always troublesome when with clients trying to back out on a busy street like Highland Drive.
There's also a red light just past Caton there that kind of gets backed up, and if you're backing out of your driveway into traffic, this is a simpler way to do it, we thought. Another comment was made on a sale price of $599 to $6 something not being affordable. If you pull a sales in the area in the past year of anything built 2016 or newer, the cheapest home is not done with construction yet, and it's listed at $800. If you're just looking for a buildable lot or a tear down, the cheapest one is $250. My understanding is that it's probably too small to build a house on anyway, so that one's probably a throwout. Then the next cheapest one's $354 that's still available. So we feel like, although it doesn't expressly answer the PUD's affordable housing component for the area, it's the new normal to be 600 plus.
Can you just speak to your decision to not incorporate the old house into your new project?
Yeah, there's multiple reasons why. One, the current owner of it has let it go immensely on the inside. It's kind of looked to be full of junk and waste. It's pretty far down the line. Outside of that, there has been a couple of experts that have gone through and been concerned with the types of materials that are used in there and concerned for health as demoing that apart and trying to reuse structure. So it really turns into a complete interior demo and having to restructure to make it usable. Initially, when we looked at the property, we were considering it as for commercial use and rehabbing it into a commercial use zoning. That kind of forced us to end up with a large sea of asphalt around for parking, which we felt was less desirable for the area of keeping that sugar house feel to it. So really where we kind of got into feasibility of what we're doing was financially making the project work, and the current price of what that is sold at and expected to be sold at does not fit to rehab the home and try to keep it as one single family residence.
Any other questions before we go to the public hearing? Okay. Thank you both very much.
Yes.
All right, we're going to go ahead and open the public hearing on this. I guess that's a flash flood warning we're all getting. Is that? I'm just seeing that on my phone. So hopefully we can survive this public hearing. We will go ahead and start with the Community Council representative. Judy, you got 5 minutes.
Okay, good to see you guys. We're really sorry to see this happen. You know, we really are proud of our historic district, and when the historic district was formed, I think I included with you the reports that were made. This was a contributing structure. All but 18% are contributing structures in the area, which is quite a high number. We noticed this the same way we notice all of our things, with flyers on the porches of the neighbors, and we put it on the website. We had a hearing at the Land Use Committee and also at the Sugar House Council meeting. And I know you have some comments, and there are people here to speak. It's not clear to us that this project meets any of the planned development ordinance. I suppose you could argue that it's a more efficient use of land because there are 4 parcels instead of 1, but that's not a goal of the planned development. It doesn't show any innovation. Removing the house doesn't preserve the house. It feels more like a slap in the face after holding this home up as a prime example of old sugar house at its finest for many, many years. And the proposal shows 4 stark modern homes on a prominent street in a traditional neighborhood of early 20th century homes. These homes will not complement that neighborhood. And we've seen modern homes that are very compatible with old historic neighborhoods. It's possible to design these to be more compatible. And of course, they're not affordable. That was sort of a sarcastic comment on my part, because the neighborhood won't support it. But that is one of the goals of the city. So I'm just pointing that out. We have one more example without that. It's, if you look at page 3 of the Sugar House Master Plan regarding planned developments, this proposal doesn't apply with anything in that list. The orientation of the buildings has the rear side of the buildings facing Highland, which is contrary to the goals of the master plan. I don't see any reason why you could approve anything that puts the rear of the home against Highland Drive. Those need to be facing the street. And a real front door, not a fake porch, but an actual usable front door. The master plan calls for preserving natural and built features that significantly contribute to the character of the neighborhood. and the demolition of the contributing historic structure and the removal of the mature landscaping is contrary to the standard. So I think there are better solutions. One would be to restore the house and add 2 traditional homes to the rear with access down a private driveway. Another big problem is the Caton Way Highlands of Sugar House development that was built I'm guessing about 20 years ago. I hope you all went on the Planning Commission tour today to see how narrow that street is. There's a photo in there that is very clear on showing you that the driveways are short, the cars all hang out 2 feet into the street, and there are several, probably 3 right turns, 45-degree angles. You can't get down the street. So I think if the gate he's talking about goes in, if you approve this project, which I hope you don't, the gate should keep out anybody who doesn't have business in the Highlands. There's no reason for the Caton people, or the 2660 development people, to go down that street. I nearly got hit by a kid coming down that street so fast, and there's no place to get off, there's no sidewalk. So I think that's a serious problem. I think that agreement needs to be rewritten. So I think the neighbors will tell you what they think. The Sugar House Community Council is opposed to this development as it's designed. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. All right, I'm going to go through my cards that I have first, and if you haven't turned in a card, you still have an opportunity to speak. We'll do that right after the card. So we'll first start with Patsy McNamara. You can coming up to the microphone. Did you just want me to read your comment? Okay, I will just read it then. I'm sorry, you indicated that. I didn't even notice. I'm sorry. The project is within the Highland Park Historic District, which should have significant influence on the home design. The proposed are totally out of character for the neighborhood. We need to preserve Sugar House. Thank you. John McNamara, I assume you want to come up and speak. And you'll have 2 minutes as soon as you get up here, and just give us your name into the microphone and for the record, and then we'll start the timer.
Commission for allowing us to...
Wait till you get to the microphone so we get you all on the record. And the people at home can hear you. There you go, thanks.
John McNamara, and I am a resident of the Highlands of Sugar House planned unit development that is immediately south of the proposed project. And our major concern from the onset has been the notion that the easement, the access, the egress and ingress to that project is through Caton Way, which is a small 30-foot wide lane with no sidewalks, concave gutters that run to our storm drains. And we are concerned about the vehicular traffic that would be required to support 4 units, 4 homes in that complex, where you're going to have garbage, you're going to have service vehicles, you'll have the 8 resident or the 8 automobiles that are part of that project. And we're concerned about the safety, frankly, of, we are mostly senior citizens with, very little agility to get out of the way if we have a lot of traffic. I'm referring to the ordinance that requires the adherence to the ordinance for a planned unit development. And it's replete with notions of compatibility. Is it compatible with the neighborhood and that kind of thing? And also, it talks about the impact on adjacent properties. And we would urge you to take a good, close look, you likely have, and know that the requirements are pretty stringent. And, but again, I think our major concern is the traffic with service vehicles, access by the fire department, emergency services and that kind of things. So we would just ask that consideration be given to moving that egress and ingress to the north boundary of the property.
Okay, thank you. That's your time. Appreciate your comments very much. All right, next we have Ryan Kempema. Okay, you coming up to the microphone. We got to get you on the record there.
Ryan Kempema. I'm the actually HOA president of the Highlands of Sugar House. I guess I had more questions regarding the gate that was proposed. Can I direct that to the developers, or is this more of a format?
It's more of you talk to us, but we take notes and
Okay.
often ask it.
So to piggyback on what John said regarding the traffic concerns, the developers had said they'd put in a gate, an electric gate. On the presentation, I noticed it was west of the access, and I'm wondering if it could be moved more east of the access so it's away from our homes. That's just a question there. And then I know the original easement, they had proposed to move that roughly 30 feet to the east as well, and I want to make sure that's confirmed. It looked like it was on the presentation, but I just wanted to make sure that was confirmed as well, that it was moved 30 feet to the east. I think that's it.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Next we have Allison Hayrand. Hello, Allison.
Hi, Weston. I also live in Highlands of Sugar House, and our homes were built in the early 90s, and we've invested in the community. We've upgraded our property. We've paid our HOA dues and assessments. We've paid taxes to the city, school district, library fund, and other taxing entities for 25 years. We all know what's happening in Sugar House. The pace of development is a blistering pace. We're all worried about congestion from traffic, parking, and the changing face of the community. We understand progress and development. We know that change is constant, but your own ordinances call for compatibility. And I would cite Chapter 13.78 of Planned Unit Development, Section C. The calculation of planned unit development density may include open space that's provided as an amenity to the planned unit development. Public or private roadways located within or adjacent to a planned unit development shall not be included in the planned unit development area for the purpose of calculating density. So I have yet to have a clear answer why they can't locate these homes so that access for egress and ingress would be on the north boundary. That's where the existing driveway is for Grace Sperry's home. The current homeowner has rarely, if ever, used that easement. She's always relied on her driveway to the north edge of the property. We've documented our concerns about traffic and safety and the worry that our tiny little development will become a thoroughfare for people cutting down through Highland along Caton Way and out onto Angelita Court. So we welcome residential construction on the property that enhances rather than detracts from our community. And our presence as a well-maintained PUD will surely enhance the developer's marketing and sales efforts with prospective buyers. Thank you.
Thank you. That is all the cards that I have. Is there anyone else who is here tonight who would like to come up and speak on this matter? Come on up. And when you, oh, that's okay. Just when you get to the microphone, just give your name there, and you've got 2 minutes.
My name is Harry Ewing. I live on Crystal Avenue. I've been there in that house since the 60s. So I've seen a lot of changes in Sugar House. Some are good and some are not so good. And I know Sugar House well. One of the issues that came up was the traffic, and I still don't know why we can't access this property if it's being built from Highland Drive. The street, all of Highland Drive, people back out every day of the week to go to work or whatever, in and out. And one of the comments was we can't back out Yes, you can. Everybody does it. There are single driveways in and out. And secondly, these homes aren't compatible with the architecture in the neighborhood. Like I say, I've seen Sugar House being built, but these are popular homes, I'll agree. But they just aren't compatible with the old Sugar House area and the homes, the brick homes, the bungalows that are along Highland Drive and some of the side streets like I live on. I know the contractor has to maximize his profits on this property, but it just doesn't fit. There's a lot of issues there. I think all of the comments were great. We just need to take everything under consideration, but please preserve our neighborhood. We're losing it fast, and you know, that's all we have now. We're senior citizens. And see what you can do for us, okay? Work it out with the contractor, but please consider the neighborhood and those long-term residents. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? All right. Oh, come on up. Sure. And just give your name into the microphone when you get there, and you got 2 minutes.
My name is Jerry Schmidt. I live on Elizabeth Street and been living there since 1983. Grateful for the opportunity to speak to you folks tonight and address the issue, and very grateful to our veterans who gave so much to maintain our democracy so we can do and have hearings like this. I would, should this house be demolished, I will miss this unique home in our neighborhood. I do appreciate what Judy and others have said about the historic nature of the home, and frankly, having seen what other people have done inside Salt Lake City with regard to preservation of old buildings, I wouldn't be surprised if it's possible for this one as well. Looking at the design of the properties or the homes, I do agree that they're not very compatible with what's in the area now. Reminds me of the old folk song Little Boxes by Malvina Reynolds. And I look at those, to me, the street area that they're talking about with the frontage of the 4 homes there would be the most aesthetically pleasing part of the project, and not one that people going through Sugar House on Highland Drive should see the back of homes rather than that. And makes me wonder, why couldn't you turn those 2 houses on Highland Drive, just turn them around and have backyard access to the driveway and just do the driveway differently? I also wonder about the earthquake faults in the area. I know the folks at the Highlands of Sugar House had to design around the earthquake faults in that property. There's also a lot down the street, about 3 houses down, that's quite large, and I wonder what would happen if they came to you with the same type of development, and, you know, would you be able to turn that one down if you let this one go through? I just think that the design, I agree with what people have said about the design. I don't think it's very compatible with what's in Sugar House now. And I just, you know, at least have one home facing the front, so this is what people see as they go through Sugar House in the Highland Drive area. And again, yeah, you know, it's a part of the deal is the maximization of profits for this, and $2.5 million out of that lot is it's a chunk of change. But thank you for the opportunity to speak. And I also want to say that I consider myself an ally of Grace Sperry. She's done a lot for our community as chair of the Sugar House Community Council in the past, and she's helped the residents of Elizabeth Street out with issues that they've faced as well. But and I would like to see her do well, but at the same time, I think what's been presented here tonight doesn't help our community as well as it should. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Come on up. And just give your name into the microphone when you get up here, and then you'll have 2 minutes.
I'm Grace Sperry, and I'm the awful one that owns the property. I have a couple of comments to make regarding some of the things that have been said tonight. One, we're not in Plat A. We're not part of the historic district that Polly Hart put together for the city in 1997. We're in Plat B. 2, my house was built by Hans Jensen, who is the person who, with Kimball and Richard, designed Highland Park, but he did not include this house. And the reason he didn't is it was built for his daughter. The house has had a very sad, long, excuse me, history. His daughter's husband committed suicide. She moved back to the mansion. It was empty for years. It was then bought by a man named Athos, who was Greek. He was the first Greek to live east of 7th East, but he didn't buy it in his name. If you notice on the historic information, they keep saying it was rented, 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 because no one who was not part of the Caucasian race could live in a house east of 7th East at that time. This is true all the way up in that area. Then the next thing is, when he died, it was empty. And when it was empty, it was bought by the Taylors. It was then used as an old folks' home for nearly 35 years. All of the rooms were divided up and turned into bedrooms. They put the kitchen in the basement. There was one bathroom in the basement, one on the main, one up. That was it. And the old folks, these veterans, used to go up and down to the basement if they wanted to eat any food. The house inside has been totally torn apart for an old folks' home. After that, it was a home for abused teenagers for a long time. Then it was empty again, and it was empty for 3 years when we bought it. We've lived there since 1990. The Highlands of Sugar House have only been there since about 95, and they wouldn't even have the 14 condos that they have if we had not given them access and 10 feet easement on the south side of the property so they could build Caton Way. That entire area was once the AT&T service yards for years and years. The properties to our south are commercial. And if anything, these properties that they are considering building look just like the commercial buildings to the south. So since it's not part of Plat A, which is a little teeny bungalow next to me, it is perfect for that area. They all have flat roofs, they're very contemporary, and the Highlands of Sugar House are not typical of Sugar House. They are very contemporary ramblers and are built in the style of the 90s. So thank you for your interest in the property, and I hope it goes through.
Thank you very much. Anybody else? Okay, seeing none, we'll go ahead and close the public hearing and probably have Ashley come back up. I think I have a couple questions, and then we'll go from there. So just to clarify, because there were a lot of questions, if the applicants want to come up too, that's fine.
If what?
Yeah, if you guys want to come up, that's fine. The current edition of the plans does have the actual front door to these houses on Highland Drive, correct?
Yeah, and that was one thing I wanted to point out is technically the front of a property being the address and the front door. Those have been changed to show the front of the property. For all means necessary, the garage access is off the back of the property, which would be not traditional, I guess you could say.
And then, Ashley, your suggestion as in the staff report would be to enhance that component, to make it so that the frontage of the house is even more noticeable as the front of the house and that sort of thing, right? And that your argument is that they will have to come back to you for final approval on that component as well, right?
Yes, and I was sitting in the back. I did not see their presentation if things had changed since my presentation, so.
I don't think so.
Okay. All
yeah,
right,
no,
then
there was
yes.
just a reference to some changes that have been made, so I asked the question, but
Okay.
it sounds like there still needs to be some work on that. I just wanted to clarify that because it seemed like there was a lot of confusion about where the front of those houses were, and it sounds like for sure those two houses on Highland will be facing Highland.
Frontage, yes, absolutely.
And then maybe we should speak a little bit to the easement on the private drive, because I know there was a lot of documents in the staff report related to the easement. And so there is a legal right for the property owner of this parcel to utilize that private drive. Is that what I'm understanding from reading those documents?
I mean, this is it's kind of more of a civil issue, but I did get that easement document, looked it over, and with our city attorney's office just briefly, and it appears that yes, there is, they have the right to that easement is in place for their benefit, but it is definitely up to them to assure that they have that right.
Right.
We have had our attorney and our title company review that as well.
Okay. And then to the HOA president who asked about the property, from my understanding, you had the original design that curved the road, the new private drive in between the houses, and that was then moved up. Was that the 30 feet?
Correct. We did move that 30
east?
feet further east to give them more space there, and then we did put the gate in between our access and their access so that our residents would not be using any of their road past the gate to access into any of their subdivision. And if we needed to, if we wanted to discuss moving that gate closer to maybe our drive and access, we'd be happy to do so.
Okay. I mean, it sounds like you'd be amenable to talking with
Yeah,
the
I mean,
president to
it's a
figure that
lot
out.
of the discussion there has been obviously concern of the narrowness of their road, their current residents not having room inside their 2-car garages and their narrow or their short driveways to park, so they've been on the road. We don't have any control of what happens there, but I think putting in a gate immediately remedies people from driving through there, and that's, I think, where we can absolutely help out.
Okay. And then, Ashley, I have a question about the transportation. It was a little bit vague as transportation was asking about, or kind of, I think, talked about parking. And I know there's some kind of concern about traffic. Does the transportation department, when they're looking at a project like this, do they look at the impact on a private drive, or are they only looking at the impact on the public road?
I believe only public roads.
Okay. Is there any time that's considered how that would impact or does that just not?
And even, I mean, my question is too, is like, can we even consider it since it's a private drive and not a public road?
We generally would not look at the activity on a private road.
Okay.
Gating off that public road completely gets rid of our traffic impact other than the very frontage of it.
Yeah.
So.
And then the other question I have is just to that issue of, and I know this is kind of my big one. I saved it for last. And this is the issue of compatibility with the plan development. And that just seems like such a big one, both from the community and also from interpretation from staff and our interpretation. What exactly that means, and I know that's where I think you put most of your conditions was in that compatibility issue, and so that the frontage there. But where does that stop? Like, how do we, and I think one of the community members brought up in relation to its impact on neighboring properties, and I don't know. It's just hard to measure that. So I don't know if you have any further comments on that to maybe address some of the community's concerns related to compatibility.
Sorry, I don't know. I don't know what you mean by that.
Yeah, I think honestly,
how do we judge that standard? Like, that's kind of what I'm asking.
And this is obviously a common theme with plan developments, but I think that's kind of up to the commission to discuss on what that means, and it's going to be different in every context. And so I think there was some testimony about not only the residential structures, but the commercial structures. And I think my advice would be that you kind of have to consider both of those things, because both of those types of structures are part of the surrounding properties in the community. What that means to you and your deliberations really is going to be up to you. But, in the past, we have looked at primarily kind of the scale, setback, the street-facing features of the home or of the design and things like that.
Can I also address a little bit of compatibility? It's oftentimes, I think, we get that mixed up with stylistic compatibility, and where Nick maybe mentioned compatibility may fit within the the setbacks, the lot size, the coverage. Currently, these coverages of the homes are only about 17 to 27% of the individual lots themselves. So there's a lot of green space, open yard around that, which would play to the deep front yards that you do often see in the sugar house areas. The style that is a separate word from compatibility reflects what current high sells are going for in the area. As a builder and developer, obviously that's one of the prime reasons I'm doing it, is to provide a living for myself. If we start to talk stylistically, is modern becoming a current style, or has become and is now there? Absolutely. Whether you look at the 21st and 13th corridor, or you start to look at infill lots through Harvard, Yale, Princeton, all down through Western Sugar House, modern's becoming that new infill concept. To speak a little bit to that, I'm the vice president for the Salt Lake Home Builders Association. I'm very involved in the Parade of Homes. I put a modern home in every year, and I'm usually one of the top visited homes over the past 5 years due to that stylistic change. That is a style that people want, and I recognize that it's maybe a rough change to people that don't live in that, because they respect and they like their current communities and homes they live in, and I can respect that as well. But I feel like the compatibility versus the style have to be treated as really two separate words.
Okay. Yeah.
I left out this piece about what I was going to say.
Right. The public portion is
Let
over.
me-
We can't even hear that well, and it doesn't get on the record. So Go
The
ahead, Nick.
piece that I left out is that in standard C compatibility, it talks about what the planning commission can consider or needs to consider as part of compatibility. And so when you deliberate on that, that's what you would focus on. And some of them deal with the streets, but some of the later ones do deal with things that were mentioned about size, scale, things like that. So
Okay. Yeah.
Sure. So can the developer just talk a little bit too about the materials that you're using and, what these facades, I mean, these are pretty kind of early renderings. Talk me through what the materials you see being used in these buildings and how they might look and feel.
Typically, when I do kind of our modern designs, I'll use the base of a stucco or a lighter facade material around it to give it that light, airy feel. Most of our modern homes are designed around open filling on the inside, bringing a lot of natural light in, windows in as well. We'll use a lot of raw woods and stained woods for accents around. Because of the ability of product in CAD, it's kind of hard to show that concept. I know our planner had mentioned a lot of different types of wood accents. The goal would be similar to the styles that we showed on our slide presentation on the homes we did on Wilson. A primarily lighter base of a stucco around the home with accented areas of metal roofs, metal soffit and fascia, and wood tongue and groove accents around the house.
So have you made determination of materials on these homes yet, or is that still kind of?
We have had to, I believe, going through the beauty application, we have had to show those renderings of elevations. I'm not sure how much that locks us in. We have not had to provide any direct material boards. And so to speak to that, no, we have not. But I can't speak to what staff may say on their level of what's required based off the elevations we've done.
Can you, so then we'll talk about the side of the house that faces kind of Highland. So staff kind of brought up some of the issues and stuff that we've talked a lot about at the commission here. What are some of the changes? I mean, why don't you talk me through? I mean, I can see the renderings and the drawings, but what are some of the changes that you felt like you made between when the staff first raised the issue to today to help address this concern about street frontage along Highland?
First,
we can bring up the drawing, maybe. I don't know if on the screen, if that would help.
Yeah,
or not,
and I can probably go through why we're pulling that up.
the stuff that you've done that you feel like has helped address that concern.
First was bringing a sidewalk access to allow walkability from the front door or the door that's been provided on there out to the sidewalk on Highland. It gives it more of the easy approach, walk up front. 2 is obviously putting on an address block. 3 is adding some dimension. We went in and added some accent areas of accent materials and dimension to create some depth that you'd typically see on the front.
It'll load. It just takes a long time.
Yep. 4 would be, come on, catch up. 4 would be windows. We've gone in and changed the windows around to make it look more stylistic with the front of the house. Added the awning over the front door to make it look more like a front porch. Again, these are so early in phase, it's hard to kind of continue into landscaping. But I think landscaping would be something that would definitely address how that approach is taken as well.
Landscaping would include probably a patio, some tall grass or something to make it look more like a usable space.
Did you ever, review the roof or the pitch, or is it kind of in the structure, the height restrictions kind of tied into where you're at with the flat roof there? How did you approach the roof and the top of the house?
Height restrictions do, obviously stop us for the roof of how we go to the top and that flat frontage. In the back of the home, we did leave the shed style roof that would typically open up to the morning sun coming through. Afternoon sun's a little bit hot and makes it much less efficient to put the big windows on the west side of the house.
Do you feel like, the renderings that we're looking at now, are they close to where you want to be, maybe minus a porch and some landscaping, or do you still have a lot of work to do on these in your kind of mind?
I would say they're, let's maybe say 60% if I'm putting a percentage on it. Again, a blue material or red material may not represent a red wood type look or a darker stained grayish bluish style wood on there. It's hard to show plantings going in there. We did do a more current drawing that moved the gutter around the side so you don't see the big box gutter coming down the front of the house. Address plaques and blocks, they're hard to show. So if I'm trying to put a percentage along it, maybe a 65 percentage, but we're very open to what it needs to take to do to get that look of what might be recommended.
Do you envision in terms of you talk about a porch or a patio, what's your mind thinking in that direction there? Is it more like a...
I personally would like to see us pull that patio more along the frontage of the house, fully encompass the overhang of what the roof line shows there to give it a front patio. Again, going back to the Sugar House bungalow, a lot of those had a front porch that people would sit on. This may or may not be the case being on busy Highland Drive, but that gives a little bit more of a front appeal.
The door is definitely just a placeholder rendered door. We generally do something a little more fancy than that off the rack at Lowe's looking door.
I have some questions for staff, but it'll change topic areas. I don't know if anyone else... I'm looking at you, Brenda, because you're leaning forward. If you have questions or discussion.
No,
on the
please go
architecture.
ahead.
Okay. So for staff, first for Ashley, why are you always given the hard ones? I'm just. So realistically, talk me through A real quick. So A is that one we need to meet one of the filing objectives, and the applicant came in and said they met A, D, and F, and your staff report lists out that they met objective D. First question, did you feel like they met objective A, yes or no, or which is the combination and coordination of architectural styles, building forms, building materials, and building relationships? Do you feel like they met that objective or no?
No, because I didn't put it in there. That
D was the strongest.
Yes.
And so same with F, elimination of blighted structures and incompatible uses and redevelopment. There's nothing that says that the current building on the site is blighted, right? That's a definition that's in code and something, and right?
I think blighted would mean it's a hazard to public safety, public health, which that home would not be.
So D then is the one that we're really looking at.
Yes.
Use of design, landscape, and architectural features to create a pleasing environment. Okay. All right. Thanks.
For the record, I find it pleasing.
That's fine. I'm sure we'll discuss it.
And I did want to clarify, I think staff is saying that it meets that objective with the recommended
with
conditions
the
of
modifications
approval.
you're proposing. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? Brenda?
Yeah, I have a question, actually. It's more along the lines of what that particular D actually means. Does it mean that this project is more pleasing than something that would not be a planned unit development? In other words, maybe two houses built there? Or more pleasing than what's there now? Or more pleasing than what?
Are you asking that to someone in particular, to me?
I'm asking, well, the staff and also our wonderful attorney.
Yeah, I actually think that you, as the planning commission, get to decide what that means.
Okay.
I mean, that's an objective that's geared towards you as the decision makers.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, do we want to have a discussion amongst ourselves?
Do you mind
Or
if
do we
I
have a motion?
Do you mind if I address two more things just before we move
Go
into
for
that
it.
discussion? I know a lot of the concern was considering the PUD and the development behind us and alongside of us, and I do feel like through the discussions we've had, we have considered that. I know that's often the term might be loosely brought up, but us coming in and saying we'd like to put in a gate to help them with traffic, trying to pull the homes forward to stay away from their property, trying to put in a garbage collection that happens on our property as well, as opposed to those bringing out the garbage cans to keep the wide open of their road there. I feel like those have all been very considered to be good neighbor-like developers as we come in to make change. So I want to make note on that. And two, we were unaware that the current owner, Grace Sperry, would be here today, and I greatly appreciate her taking the opportunity to give us a little bit of the history of what that is. And explain a little bit more of the current property, what it is. I'd just like to maybe give her opportunity, if it's approvable on a staff level, that maybe invite her to change the name to whatever she'd choose of the development name itself, to maybe preserve part of the history that she's seen behind that. That's it.
Okay.
This just kind of came to me. What's your relationship with the condominium development related to that road? Are you going to participate? I know you have an easement there, but are you going to participate in the maintenance of that?
We have offered, there's currently nothing in writing, but we have offered to join as part of the HOA fees to participate in the maintenance of that road.
So the people who purchase these homes might become part of an HOA?
Yeah, if that's possible. Nothing's been set or said. That is something we've been open and willing to discuss and offer, absolutely.
Oh, okay.
Anything else? Okay. All right. Thank you very much. All right. I don't know if anyone's ready to make a motion already, or we have some.
No, I want to have a discussion.
Okay.
So I'm very much still stuck on the master plan of the PUDs. That specifically calls for, supporting new projects that incorporate the desirable architectural design featured in common in the neighborhood. And I'm just not necessarily convinced that we can add anything to that to make it a desirable architectural design that's featured in the neighborhood. And to be honest, I think that the comments given by the current property owner actually made me feel more that this was a home that really should be saved, because it has such a rich history. And because it's a contributing structure, it qualifies for federal and state tax credits for renovation through SHPO, State Historic Preservation Office. So there's opportunity to utilize those funds to do some renovation for that building. And I'm pretty much, that's really where I'm at. And I don't think that we really heard enough to convince me that they couldn't put the drive on the north, other than that's not how they want to do it. And so I'm not necessarily, I'm still stuck on those things. So I'd like to hear what other people are thinking about that.
For me, the drive is looking at the documents, the legal documents that shows that they have a right to utilize the drive, and that it sounds like there was
I don't dispute that they don't have the right, but a lot of the comments were, why can't they put it to the north? And I don't feel like I was satisfied as to why they didn't, other than I have the right to this easement. And I totally am not.
Yeah, I guess I just don't know that they're obligated to.
I just don't feel like we heard really anything to the public comments of like, why can't you do that?
Can I respond to that? If I understand it correctly, and I don't always, I'm going to say that up front, that easement was given to these property, or the new development 10 years ago by this property owner. So if they hadn't done that, this property would be 10 feet wider, and then they could put it on the north. But they gave up that property to give that driveway to this other group. And so they're saying, now we want to access that because our property is now 10 feet smaller.
And
I think that's completely legit.
And in exchange for that access, I think through the documents, it makes that pretty clear that we're giving
Right.
this, but we're going to have access to it. But I would say
That to me answers that question, not everything though.
right. So it's, for me, that is less of a concern And it sounds like the developer's very open to figuring out a way to mitigate extra traffic and the gate and that sort of thing. I'm heartbroken that it looks like the house is not going to be saved in your current plan. I think it is. My gym is very close to there, and I drive by it all the time, and I've actually noticed the house every time I drive by. I think it is a great asset to the neighborhood, and I think it's a tragedy that it's, and I don't know. It sounds like we don't have that authority, but I would argue that it being on the national registry it would be sufficient in saying that it is a historic structure. And it sounds like staff has interpreted that in another way. I don't know that I would agree with that. When it gets down to those sort of like compatibility issues, that's tough. So
with compatibility under the old planned development ordinance that we're reviewing, there's not, the way I read it and see it, there's not a lot that we have to grab onto as a foothold. I mean, a lot of it deals with access to public streets, ins and outs, and it's a deal with a private street, which is a really weird sort of position, and there's not a lot of control that we have from a standard position to deal with that compatibility question. I mean, the question that I think is more, that I've been kind of relating through is like, does this development, does or does not this development qualify for a plan development? And so, staff doesn't think that A or, F qualifies, as the applicant says. I'd probably agree with staff on those two. And then the question really is the use of design, landscaping, architectural features to create a pleasing environment qualify or not? Really, in my mind, hinges on how well the developer can deal with what happens along Highland. And I agree that staff's kind of perspective and what they're asking for is the right things to ask for. Although I also feel there's a lot of room. I mean, as I look at these, and this to me looks like a back of a house, and you could put a patio that would fit very nicely on this, that you could say was a patio for the front yard, but would really serve as a patio of the back of a house, especially if you're putting up a fence of any kind, 6 feet along the sides and 4 feet along the front, because you're required by ordinance to stick it you couldn't go higher than 4 feet on Highland. But to me, it seems like a back of a house, and I really have a lot of issues with that, and I think that makes it unpleasing for everyone else who walks along the public street of Highland Drive, which is what we have a deal with. And to me, my question is whether or not we want to delegate this back to staff, or if we want to ask for it to come back here with these rear renderings on Highland done in a way that is meaningful. And I don't know if they can achieve it as is, or even if they, I think it would be a lot easier for them if they were accessing these kind of 2 homes off of Highland Drive as the actual front of the houses. It would be a lot easier to keep this kind of inconsistent, I wonder if the developer could do anything that's going to satisfy my need to make these seem not like a rear of a house along Highland. Because again, it's another development that looks inward, and how many of those are we dealing with in this city, where developments look in at each other's houses and into each, and that's what this development does. This will be a very pleasing private street as you walk up it through a little gate. But from Highland and the rest of us, we'll look at the back of houses. That's my concern.
Okay. Brenda?
So I have several concerns about this project. The first being actually what Matt was alluding to, which is that I'm not sure that it meets the plan development objectives at all. So whether or not it's compatible, or whether or not it's, the other things that the compatibility question is really not as important as the question of whether it qualifies for planned unit development. Because in order for us to say that it qualifies for that, we would have to say, oh, this is going to be a much better project because we're allowing this to have an internal street with no buildings, with 2 buildings that aren't on the street. I cannot say that. I don't believe that it is a much better project than if it were as of right, so to speak. my natural, my interest in this, of course, would be to reuse the house for condominiums and divide it up into 2 or 3 or whatever, and then have, additional units in the back, which of course would require a planned unit. But then we'd be talking about a much better project, not this project that's not much better. So from my perspective, I simply can't go along with even the objectives of the plan. I don't think it meets the objectives of the plan development. It's basically a much denser project than would be allowed, not a much better project than would be allowed.
So why would it be better to have, like, say, 4 houses sideways like you're proposing? And why isn't density better?
Well,
because the condos next to it are fairly dense in comparison to the neighborhood.
I would be, I think, much happier with 4, housing in a row than this project.
But we're always wanting people to orient their buildings to the street, and you're
Right.
saying turn them sideways and have them
No,
all
I'm not
sideways?
saying turn them sideways. Nobody's suggesting turning sideways.
I thought that's what I just
No,
heard
no,
you
no,
say.
I didn't say that. I would prefer to have the existing house preserved and reuse it as condominiums. And we've heard no evidence of the actual condition of the inside of the house. Not that we would, it's not part of our purview to say that, but.
The developer proved it was blighted, then they will qualify for number F, and I don't think it's blighted.
Well,
But
if
if
somebody's
they-
been living in it
Yeah.
recently, then it's probably not blighted.
But if they preserved it, then they would qualify for Plan Development C,
Yes.
and
Yes.
we'd probably be very open to doing
Yes,
many
if
other
they
things
preserved
with
it,
the
I
rest of
think
the
we'd
property.
be much more open to
Yeah.
something. Because that sincerely, it
clearly-
would be preservation, it would be character of the neighborhood, it would be preserving architecturally or character, it would be design landscape, blah, blah, blah. So I think that that would definitely be something that would qualify for planned unit development, but I don't see that happening with this particular proposal.
If they maintained the front house and redid that, and then the back part of the property was what we are seeing today, with just like an access in the middle with 2 more houses or something like that, you would think that's a better plan?
I would think it's better, but I'm not the whole planning commission.
Sure. I'm just trying to understand what exactly, where you're coming from with your definition
question.
of better, so that I can get to a point where I understand.
Brenda, you and I are similar in the sense of, like, the plan as presented is not pleasing, like, particularly along the Highlands sort of drive. And, I mean, a question for you is, do you feel like this developer could get there? Or, which means we either table
With
it and
this
take it
plan,
back
you mean?
with this plan, or are we gonna, or were you saying that we should vote this down because the developer can never get there, which would mean they could come back before us, but they would have to be under the new plan development ordinance, which I do think is better. But
I couldn't say what they could possibly do.
better.
I
They would
don't,
have
I
to
mean,
make this
I'm
clear.
not going to suggest how they redesign it, but I think that, of course, anything can be made better, particularly when you're talking about architectural design.
But you don't think that anything here, that they could do a whole lot, given height restrictions and constraints, that they could do a whole lot to create a more pleasing environment along Highland, given what they're.
I would be willing to look at something, yes, of course. But the other thing I think is that the other concern that I have, or the other question I have is, why isn't there a driveway? I mean, the driveway on the north, what's been said is that you don't want to back out. You're not going to back out. Look at the site plan. You back out of your parking stall and you're going forward from that point on. So you're not backing out of a driveway. If you had the drive on the north side instead of on the south, it would be the same exact condition. So you'd be going front ways out onto Highland Drive,
But it
which is
narrows
what
their lot
everybody
by 10
on
feet
that road
as
does.
well.
Excuse me?
It narrows their buildable area by, 10 feet as well?
Well, at least 10 feet for a driveway.
Increases more street surface. in
Right,
that
it would probably require us to look at, but I don't know how much of that could be in the setbacks and so forth. Again, I just don't think that not being able to back, I'm just pointing out that backing out is not really an issue.
Well, to Matt's point, I think it's, do you want to try a motion, Matt, and see, you don't? Brenda, do you?
I mean,
it seems like you two are.
to me, there's two options. I mean, we could table it and let the developer come back,
Mhm.
and or maybe people are like the development as is, and we can move it forward as well. I mean, and with the staff's recommendations, and let staff decide whether or not they meet the criteria. I do think Ashley's outline of the things she's looking for are the right things to look at. It's just a question of whether or not we as a staff feel comfortable or not. And I feel it's so much work needs to be done that this is more than like minor tweaks and sketching. This is significant. I mean, you've got the utility pole running up the side of the building, on Highland Drive right now, or the gutter. I mean, it's just
And scupper, yeah.
you would never put that on the front of a house, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done for me to even give this a shot. And so whether or not we're pushing it back to staff and tabling it, letting this, so one we can table it. And let the developer come back with that fixed. Or if people don't think that there's anything the developer can do to get there, then we vote it down. Or we can vote it forward.
Yeah, those are the options. Do you want to choose one of those to do?
Chair, no. I don't know where the rest of the planning commission is. I know where Brenda's at, but I don't know where everyone else is.
Maybe I can help you a little bit.
I know where Clark might be. But.
I inherently don't have a problem with making 4 lots out of that. Ideally, you could keep that historic house, but that may or may not be feasible. But these designs, I don't think are compatible with the neighborhood. I'm kind of with you, like whether there's something, is there something, some things that are kind of an easy fix, or do they really need to start over?
I mean, I think that oftentimes compatibility, it's our decision, but it's also our decision based on the feedback we get from the community, and that's what that sort of notion of being compatible is, or pleasing, I guess, is the one I'm going for. And the communities I hear tonight saying that it's not, and so I think that that's probably where they would go to make it more pleasing, is working with the community more to find what that is.
So do you guys think that if this developer came back with 4 little bungalows that are perfectly in architectural style with that neighborhood, that we would have just approved it? Is it a design issue at this point, architecturally?
The lot's large enough. It remains an R1 5000 zone. They're not asking for setback restrictions. They're not changing the lot sizes. Fundamentally, I have no problem with them putting 4 houses on this lot. Like, it seems fine. I mean, they have a right to put 4 houses in the lot.
You just want them to look like the rest of the houses in Sugar House?
No, I think that my only concern, the only thing I think we can even, and not my only concern, I have other concerns, but the only concern I think we can do anything about is what the facade looks along Highland Drive.
I think you're right, yeah. Well, and so I was looking over what Ashley had put in as conditions, and I think this is a great way to put it. I would want to know a little bit about what's a more appropriate window configuration for a street-facing facade. I don't know what's inappropriate about this street-facing facade. Are the windows too small? Are there not enough of them? And then also use of more articulation in the building wall. So I don't know what metric are we increasing, or are we measuring more by? But I think that these conditions are the right direction, and I really think that if we had those details, that I would be in favor of just approving it the way that staff has written it.
I think Amy has said it at a previous meeting where, in these neighborhoods, porches are on the front and they are utilized for that sort of community
Absolutely.
Aspect.
And that's a clear one in here. Enhanced entryway with usable porch
Right.
feature.
Nobody's gonna lounge on that porch, and I know it's on a busy street, but I think even still, people would hang out in a bungalow porch and.
I totally agree.
say
I think
neighbors.
it needs to have a porch. It needs to have an engaging front to it. I want to know how to make sure that we get that and they don't just come back and staff says, okay, that's fine.
I think I share that concern, but it's not always a porch. This current home doesn't have the bungalow porch. Other homes on Highland Drive across the street and adjacent do. So it's just kind of one of those mixes. So it's not as if slapping a porch on it makes it
Right, for sure.
fit all the time, because this current home doesn't have it, but it has a lot of architectural features that are contributing to the historic nature of this neighborhood as a whole in Highland Park, which this is in Forestdale. But so I don't know that, that I think that's part of my questions too, is what is, if conditions are met, what are these conditions? How are they really going to look? Because it's not as simple as just, let's put a porch on it. Because it's not a generic solution for everything when we're talking about compatibility to any specific neighborhood.
So it sounds like you're more in line with, in the things that Matt laid out, that you would like them to come back.
Well, and I actually have been thinking now when Matt and Brenda were talking, now I'm really wondering, does this meet the plan development objectives really? Why is it coming to us as a plan development the way it should, or, that it's not meeting all of the conditions to really even be considered? So I don't know.
Well, it doesn't have to meet all the conditions,
It
but
has to be just one.
right. But then I think that there is some contradiction here in that they're actually contradicting against some of the other conditions to meet the one that they're choosing, which
True.
makes it
That's a good
difficult.
I think, staff's in this position, and I would agree with staff, and I think the commission is as well. As proposed, this plan development does not meet any of the conditions that would qualify it for a plan development. They need to do something along Highland to make it a pleasing environment. That's what staff is saying, and I agree with staff. And my question for the commission really is, and I think this will just to move us forward, is either one, do you think they can get there? Or two, do we need to, no, they probably can't get there and we're voting it down? Because even when you look at the houses, the front of the houses is clearly facing in. Even the Mountain Modern examples that the developer provided us look like the front of a house and exactly the side of the house that's facing the private street. This is a rear of a house. We are looking at a rear of a house. It's pretty clear. It's just whether or not we think the developer could get to where they need to be to
So
be pleasing.
if we tabled it with direction to work on that,
Can we can we table it for a developer to come back, or is that we haven't done
Sure.
that really?
Yeah,
we did that with the one
Yeah, we've done it.
additional detail. Yeah.
I'll give you what I think I'm hearing is that you don't have enough information to decide if they actually meet an objective. And in that case, then you can, and I think you just kind of explained it a little bit, you can request that they come back with more evidence to prove that they do meet those objectives.
So-
It could be that they come back with a different objective, though. I think that's something you have to consider. But, that's kind of what I'm hearing.
Yeah, so
Hearing you
and so
talk
the one
about.
that Matt just brought up that we had come back, we were really specific though with him about that blank wall on the north end.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Still didn't do a great job. Let's be honest.
you
I
voted
mean, he meant
yes.
he
so
meant what we
you
asked him
voted
to,
yes.
but he still didn't do that great of a job.
So my question to Nick is, if we table this, because we were so specific to that previous one, I don't know that we can be as specific to this, because my personal feeling is, I don't know what they can do to this to make it fit. If we table it, what's the level of direction expected from us in that regard, so that we're somewhat being consistent?
Right, and it needs to be more than the word more, which is what is already in the condition, right? So if we're having an issue with that, we need to come up with specifics. And I'm not a designer, but so I'd like to just have a better definition.
I would ask the commission to consider whether if they came back with a proposal wherein the actual facade of the house they've proposed as the front was the front on Highland Drive. In other words, if they flipped that house entirely, of course that would put the garage in the front, but if it were something like that with the garage in the back instead. I mean, that's their best foot forward, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, I think these designs are a little rough, and even if they've advanced them more, we haven't seen those tonight, right? But
Is that okay?
I-
Is that a good front?
I mean, it's potentially also, we can give them another shot and table it, and if it doesn't, still, we don't feel like it meets the qualification, we vote it down next time. So if we want to give them one more shot, we
So
can
would we
do
be
so now.
giving them a shot at, well, I guess we'd be giving them a shot at actually meeting one of these criteria for the plan development,
Yeah,
is what we're saying.
Yeah.
Okay.
and they can choose how to do that.
Yep.
It puts the burden on them.
Yeah.
which
Would
is where
that
it
bring
should
them
be.
under different PUD guidelines?
Say that again.
I don't
The
think so. 'cause
new-
no, because we haven't finished.
No, it's the
this.
same
Oh,
application.
Thank you.
It's
All
the
right.
same app-
Thank you.
If we denied it, though, they would have to come back.
Denied it, they'd
They
have to come
deny
back
it,
under the
but
new
we'd have
guidelines,
to.
not these.
Okay.
So, sounds like maybe we have a motion. Who wants to do it? I cannot.
I'll do it. To ensure compatibility with based on the information, the staff report, information presented, and the input received during the public hearing with the Planning Commission table plan development PLN SUB 2017-01027 and associated preliminary subdivision PLN SUB 2017-01028. With the following that needs to be addressed by the applicant to ensure compatibility with the character of existing development with the vicinity of the site. The eastern elevations of the homes on lot 1 and 2 that face Highland, shall be altered to include architectural features typically found on a front facade of a single-family home, such as A through D listed in the staff report. I'd also like to add E that includes roof detailing that would be more consistent with a front of a home. And I'd like to maybe also add that the developer consider primary driveway access off of the east side. And discuss why that would not be possible. And coming back to this, the developer needs to come back to the staff or back to the planning commission for final approval.
Did you mean north side or did you say east side? You want the whole drive on the north, or do you want?
On the east side, facing Highland driveway. Driveway comes off of Highland.
Okay.
East side. Yep.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Okay. Motion by Matt and second by Sarah. Any other discussion? The drive off Highland seems. I see your point, but
They should explore that.
I don't know that is what
Well,
people want.
come back with it.
Okay.
And they don't have to.
We'll see what all of you think.
They don't have to do any of what we said.
Yeah, it's true.
They could come back with the exact same proposal and say, vote her up, vote her down. They don't have to do anything of what we asked for.
Okay. Did you include number 2 and 3 of that motion into?
Yeah, those are official.
Okay, but you
plat
included those as well?
modifications that we'd want to make. There's a final. That's nothing. Nothing the developer can.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, we'll go ahead and vote. Let's start over with Andreas.
I do like the design myself. I mean, it is a nice modern looking design, but again, the issue with me is compatibility with the place where it's at, and I think that's what's lacking, and so I will vote yes.
Clark?
Yes.
Maureen?
Yes.
Matt?
Yes.
Amy?
Yes.
Carolyn?
Yes, and thank you, residents, for your comments.
And Brenda?
Yes, and I would just say that I really support Matt's number E, because I think that's a big part of what we heard from the residents.
And Sarah?
Yes.
Okay. There you have it. I guess we'll see you back here in a while. Thanks. And thank you to the community for coming out. Really appreciate your comments and feedback. It is very helpful to us. Moving on to the next one, number 2 of our public hearings. This is the modification to Centro Civico Senior Housing. And if you could move your conversation out into the hall, that would be helpful so we can move through our agenda items. Hello, David.
Hello. Give us a moment. We're trying to get the presentation queued back up. Oh. Thank you.
It was in the middle. It looks like a great rear door that you can put a concrete patio around the backyard with a fence that's 6 feet around. It would make a great backyard. I mean, it would.
Yes, it would.
Okay, I can start anytime.
Yeah, go for it. Sorry.
Okay, so this is the Centro Civico Senior Housing Project. Changes to that project requested by the applicant. This is PLN sub 2017-00370 and PLN PCM 2017-00525. This is a proposed 60,000 square foot, approximately 6-story building, 61 unit senior housing apartment building, about 75-foot tall building. It was approved by the Planning Commission on August 23rd of 2017. So we're back before you with some proposed changes. The original process, this went through the plan development process. Being a new use in the GMU zoning district, it did require the plan development process. And due to choice of materials, including corrugated metal, it was subject to the conditional building and site design review process. So it did previously receive approval, but there are some requested modification to design elements of the building. One of these concerns a wall in excess of 15 feet at the street level in the Gateway zoning district, and with the CBSDR standards, you're limited to 15 feet. They have about a 25-foot wall at the ground level. There was a requirement from the Planning Commission to include public artwork on the front elevation of the building. Again, now that wall could be broken up with that artwork. Also, the CBSDR process did require that all buildings include a public artwork element. The applicant has proposed looking at other elements in lieu of artwork on the front elevation wall, and they did propose some 3D architectural elements on the upper floors of the building. This was both at the work session of July 26, 2017, and the subsequent public hearing. The Planning Commission and staff both had concerns about the starkness of that wall, and we're looking for ways to break up that elevation, provide some kind of shadowing, maybe a little bit more texture to that wall. So that is the elevation that was approved by the Planning Commission. What's not shown is about the middle of that wall between the windows you see at the ground level on the left side of the building, and what's a small lobby on the right side of the building, the southwest corner. That would be the blank wall that we were looking for some artwork to break up. And this is the proposed design change. It's the only drawing I had of it, unfortunately. Again, the applicant's looking to keep that kind of blank wall at the ground level, but use architectural concrete with some grooves and other material changes to satisfy that blank wall requirement, and also putting the number at about the third floor level to satisfy some additional articulation on the upper floors of the building. Staff is recommending the Planning Commission take the following action in regard to changes. Deny the modification to the blank wall, require that an element of interest be included in addition to the architectural concrete. Also, deny the change to eliminate the public art, make the art required on that street level to, in addition to the architectural concrete, to provide some element of pedestrian interest. And again, approve the request to eliminate the 3D architectural elements.
Mr. Chair, can I just make a quick comment? When David mentioned the date of approval, it sprung into my head that their original approval, regardless of what you would do, would expire tomorrow. So regardless of what decision you make, you should clarify whether or not you want to extend that approval date, just so that we're not back here trying to figure it out again.
No, that, they have been in for building permit, though.
Oh, they have?
Oh, yeah, they've
Okay.
been in.
Never
these-
mind.
Yeah,
Disregard
these
that.
changes came about as we've been going through the building permit process, so.
So, one of the one standard that you're recommending we approve, or the modification that we would approve, would be to allow basically the third story up to be the lacking of glass and
While it
different
does,
materials
right.
and that sort of thing.
while it does lack glass, the standards in the Gateway District really the building, window, and fenestration really are aimed at more the ground floor level. And there are some, again, material differences, changes to eliminate it being a totally stark wall. Now, again, there may be some value added in having those 3D elements to break that up further, but it does meet the first floor glass requirement of 40%.
And the public artwork requirement is also just on the main floor.
The public artwork requirement wasn't specified for the main floor, but there was a public artwork requirement specified if you go through the conditional building and site design review process.
So looking at the difference between those two, they've changed those like second story corners also?
Again, this is the only elevation I had of.
Because it had kind of open corners and was a
Yes.
little more interesting.
Yeah,
than-
that's certainly a better elevation drawing of it.
Okay. Any other questions right now? Okay. We'll have the applicant come on up.
Thanks
Hello,
for having
Peter.
us back again, a year later. This,
Has it been that long?
Honestly, has not been the easiest project. And since we've started this project, probably 6 years ago now, the project cost has increased about 50%. So, and if we don't start the project next month, we risk losing our tax credits. So it puts the entire project in jeopardy. It is an affordable housing project, senior affordable housing project. And Brandy can add to my comments. I think we're okay with the recommendations. One of the things that we would like, though, is that and it's part of the Gateway Urban Design Standards. And if you look under your public arts requirements paragraph there, it does say public art, which may include artists' work integrated into the design of the building, and landscaping, sculpture, painting, murals, glass, mixed media, or work by artisans. So we would ask that if you take into account the recommendations of the staff or vote in favor of that we could use landscaping as a public art element on the front of the building, which would help break up the facade.
I saw that in the staff report. Would you relate that to that building that's on South Temple that sort of has a vertical garden?
Yes, it would be on the ground level though, and it would be facing west, so theirs didn't survive very well, so this one would probably survive a little better. If you know the Japanese Church of Christ, they have some landscaping there, although I think it's grown a little out of control, but that would be another example. That's right on what's First South and off of 300 West. Yeah.
Any questions? Did you have more? Did you want it to bring up, or are you now open? I didn't know if you were done with your part.
That's it.
On that white area down on the ground floor, we want to add some metal artwork, which would be like a quarter sun with sun rays. just to kind of bring some of the culture of Mexico to it. So kind of like a Mexican sun design.
So we will have some public artwork. The biggest issue was really more the shadowy figures up top. In terms of putting them on the building, it was difficult in terms of cost. It was very expensive, and in terms of practicality, some people were worried that the birds would perch up there and poop on everybody down below.
So you, as the applicant, are okay with the staff's recommendations? I mean, it seems like, so it sounds like we deny the blank wall, you already have an idea of what to do. You're going to put the sun thing there. The public art requirements, I mean, your biggest concern is just the way that this kind of proposal got, which was kind of backdoored at the last minute, if I remember right. It was kind of like thought of during the meeting and wasn't fully vetted. But you feel like the public art, you'll have a component within the landscaping, so you'll probably, even if we deny that, as long as we release the kind of 3D element, that's fine. Is that right?
Correct.
So so it's not, you guys are more or less fine with the motion as proposed.
Correct.
Any other questions?
So, well, I remember the conversations when this initially came before us, that we were concerned about having a big blank wall, and now what I'm hearing is that you want a big blank wall with some art on the ground level.
Correct. Although, the upper level, I wouldn't say it's a big blank wall. First of all, the windows are recessed. Second, it's corrugated metal.
Okay.
Third, the corrugated metal. There's also a screen in the middle, which is a different element. So it really won't be a big blank wall. And then, of course, one of the reasons we did it was for energy conservation, since it's a west-facing wall.
And one of our architects is here. He may have something to add to it.
Good.
Okay. Any other questions? Brenda, do you want to ask your staff question now, or do you want to wait till after the public?
I want to know what we're looking at here. David alluded to the fact that there was only the one image that he had. We have multiple images, and I'm not sure which one we are looking at now, because we have on page 21 of the staff report, we have
Page 6.
the image you
Oh, okay, I
showed
think
us.
you're looking at the original staff report from August of 2017.
Okay.
Probably in the attachment.
Okay.
I mean, the big change that they're requesting is to get rid of the walking people and the bikes.
Right.
So
Correct.
basically, the image on page 21 would be very similar to the one that they would be talking about, because there's no walking people and bikes on this one, right?
Correct.
Okay. But you're not changing any of the other facade elements, such as the openings on the front, on the corners, or any of that, right? That's not being changed. So the only thing that's changed here is the walking bikes and walking people
The 3D projecting elements.
characteristics.
And David, can you remind me, what was the standard that drove us to asking for those 3D? I know that we didn't ask for those specifically, but asked for something there to break up the blank wall. What's the standard that we were unwilling to waver on last time? Do you remember?
As I recall, it was just dealing with the general starkness of the blank wall. There was some concern over that. And I believe in the CBSDR standards, or in the urban design element of it's the gateway mixed use urban design elements. It talks about windows and fenestration. Buildings with completely smooth exterior surfaces shall not be permitted. All new construction shall have three-dimensional details on the exterior to include cornices, windowsills, headers, similar features.
Wow, you went very literal with the 3D.
I thought it was cool.
Okay.
Did you explore making those pieces of art scooters?
Easy,
Might be a new sponsor for you.
easy to pick up on the street.
Right.
Just hang them up.
A new might have a new donor fund that for you.
Okay, any other questions before we go to the public hearing? Okay, thank you very much. We'll go ahead and open the public hearing on this. If there's a representative of the community council over this area? Anybody from the general public who would like to speak to this? Come on up, just give us your name into the microphone and you'll have 2 minutes.
How's everyone doing? Adam Wade. So I own the Central Warehouse.
You sit down and get your mouth by that microphone so we can get you on the record.
Well, I've been hearing back there with that. My name is Adam Wade. I own the Central Warehouse and the Dirt Corner on 500 West and, second 200 South, 500 West. I bought the Central Warehouse and the 2 parking lots and the Metro Bar because it's history. It's a historical area. You know, who here has been to Soho, New York? Right? Is it not amazing? And it's sad to see some of these amazing old warehouses that we have in Salt Lake be torn down. I was very fortunate to pick up that piece. I'd love to take everybody here inside that Central Warehouse, and I also own the Struve building. That was going to be knocked down. I found a way to buy that, and it just made me sick to think that some of these older buildings in some of these areas are being torn down. I'm obviously going to go over the 2 minutes here, but I have a few things to say. We have an amazing opportunity ahead of us here in Salt Lake. It's who would ever thought in Utah it would be, you know, our Salt Lake would be the Silicon Slopes. You know, it's awesome. And I know there's Northwestern Quadrant, good, bad, indifferent. We have some amazing companies that have come. And the fact that Amazon's even looked there, that's awesome. Look what's happened in Lehigh. Everything goes back urban. Everything is going to go back to Salt Lake, downtown Salt Lake. And if we look at our transportation, you look at with the new airport, you've got the front runner right there, kitty corner. I feel like that block needs to be designated. At least 1/3 of the block needs to be designated as for instance, I got hit up from a lady in Hong Kong.
What's your time?
Well, you said you gave me double the time, right?
I got a responsibility to get everybody home, so.
What you're trying to do is amazing, and I support it.
Okay.
I just, my concerns have been that was contaminated. Looks like it was EPA contaminated ground, correct? There's a lot of groundwater under there, you know, and at any time, anyone remembers when the Delta Center was dug, you know, it was just a lot of water, and then it moves over to the gateway, and it moves over, and if there's a way to, I'm a believer, if there's a way to make sure that doesn't contaminate other projects, I'm all about what's best for everybody. But I just, I hate to see some of these, you know, I think that's a great design. Does it match what the Central Warehouse and you know, those are 2 historical buildings, and that they're on the National Historic Registry. But like you mentioned, it's on 6th instead of 2nd there. So
Okay, that is your time. I appreciate your comments, though.
Do you have any questions for me?
No.
No?
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Appreciate it. Anyone else that would like to speak on this issue?
Can I ask one more quick thing?
We're not really here to answer questions. If you want to chat with the developer afterwards, you're more than welcome to.
Okay. Well, okay. Sounds good.
Thanks.
Thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
All right. Anyone else? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and close the public hearing on this and come back up to the commission for thoughts? Do you have further questions? Motions? Matt?
I'm fine.
I mean,
I'm fine. I mean, I agree with staff, and applicant seems fine with staff, so I see no reason not to move forward.
I mean,
All right, I'll make a motion.
Okay.
Mr. I have a motion.
thank you.
Based on the information in this memo, the original staff report, as well as the discussion of planning commission, the different hearings and the testimony presented, including the applicant's kind of willingness to work with staff's kind of questions, I move the planning commission to take the following actions in relation to the proposed changes to Central Civico Senior Housing Development Project. PLN SUB 2017-00370 and PLN PCM 2017-00525. And so on the ground level wall, I'd like to deny that motion. On the public art requirements, I'd like to deny that motion. And on the building facade, three-dimensional architecture, I'd like to approve the requested changes and permit staff, that's the public art one, permit staff to achieve the public art requirements through landscaping along the frontage of the lot.
Okay, we have a motion by Matt. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
We have a second by Maureen. Sorry, Brenda. Do we have any further discussion? Sarah?
I'm wondering why we're so quick to do this. I'm disappointed that we're losing art and to put in landscaping instead. I just see too much landscaping around downtown that's dead. And if that's what they're doing instead of art, I cannot get behind this.
Okay.
I'm with Sarah. I don't necessarily know that I like the 3D images on the side of the building, but I'd like some art. I think it would really beautify the project and that neighborhood. And I think that some planters aren't going to cut that.
Okay. Any other discussion? Substitute motion?
I kind of agree with that. On the other hand, I think that special artistic types of planting, rather than just the green grubbies around the bottom of the building, might actually fulfill this very well, and even better than three-dimensional bikes and people. So
if I modify the motion to have, they discuss kind of a sun ray sort of art kind of piece on the ground floor, between the windows, would that help address your concerns, or would you want it more than that?
I don't know what's the size on something like that, and I'd like to see also, what are these planters going to look like, and what is the art that they're proposing going to look like?
I agree. I think it's a big downgrade from the art they were proposing. I quite liked the 3D. I've thought of it multiple times over the last year, thinking, I liked the idea of the sun changing it over the day. Now, I didn't think about birds perching on it, and I hadn't thought through some of those things. So I understand that's a concern, but to remove the art and replace it with essentially nothing, I do not like that. If you're that art doesn't work, give me some other art.
Right. Could there be a piece of artwork mounted on the middle of that wall or something?
Well, still with the motion, we are denying the public art requirements.
You modified it to allow...
Eliminate the public art of the art piece incorporated in the street level wall. Right, to also allow it through landscaping. Okay, all right.
But again, that's just me.
Okay, so does anyone have a substitute motion, or were you going to modify, or do you just want to see how yours goes?
Let's vote.
Okay, we will go ahead and vote. Sarah?
No.
Brenda?
Yes.
Carolyn?
No.
Amy?
Yes.
Matt?
Yes.
Maureen?
Yes.
Clark?
No.
Andres? I didn't take notes.
I'm of the opinion that the three-dimensional objects are not a must for me, but with Sarah, I have to say there has to be something that appeals, that presents some idea, because this is a very, very nice building. It's a very nice structure, and I want it to be inviting to the community, and the Centro Cívico Mexicano has to be proud of a very nice building, so I have to side with them. I have to vote no.
That tie, Paul? No. If I 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, I think so.
Lucky you.
Lucky me. I'm going to go ahead and vote no on this motion, just because I think that we should probably figure this out a little bit more. Seems like there's a good divide here, and I think we might still be able to come up with a solution motion right now. So we're not saying no to it quite yet, so hold on. So let's try again. Someone else want to try a motion that I think, for me, it's just a little bit too vague. We spent a lot of time coming up last time, and last time with our discussion coming up with what resulted in this product, and I do think it is stepping back away from it quite a bit. And we talked a lot about how this is such an opportunity. It's going to be such a center for the community, and I would hate to see it too bland, because it is such an opportunity. And I think that's where our conversation was last time. I'd be thrilled if the whole thing was a mural. But I don't know how expensive that is. I'm guessing that's expensive. But I do think, yes, go ahead.
Well, I think if you take the staff's recommendations and include public art, we'll figure out what to do on the public art.
Okay.
Your guidelines. So.
And that public art thing, just to clarify, David, that's just the main floor or street level?
That was on the street level.
Yeah. So then the only thing, it sounds like, Sarah, it sounded like you were a little bit more on board with even denying the third component. And I don't.
No, I don't mind the removing of three-dimensional elements, but I don't think I would not like to just remove three-dimensional elements. If we're going to remove them, I want to replace them with mural, with something of interest, I think that my recollection of this building, that's one of the things we liked, is how much they had integrated art into this, and how this was really a nod to the seniors that are going to be in this building and to the neighbors around them. And so to remove that, I'm not married to this particular art, but I want something of interest on this building that says, this neighborhood is loved, the people who live in this building are loved, there's something important happening here. And I think without something on this building, I think it's pretty bland.
Would you like to offer another motion?
No.
That would be helpful if you would.
To be
We'll
honest,
see how that goes.
I would need somebody's motion sheet. I didn't download those, so that's that's the only reason that I would, okay. Thank you. I knew you would help me.
Happy to help.
But I haven't been thinking about what to maybe put here, so.
So what you want to do is, you're thinking of this one, Matt's most, so we deny, and perhaps approve with the project coming back.
Okay.
You're going to have to think through what you want done on that
So
last
again,
thing.
we're fine with having public art. We're okay with it. It's just
Okay.
where it goes is really the bigger concern.
So your question is, does it just belong on the first floor, or does it belong on the full building? Is that your question?
That's the biggest issue. If we have to put something up top, it's expensive. It's hard to do. Frankly, it could kill this project. Not to be, over dramatic, but if we have public art, we put it on the front level, which is what's required. Then we're fine. So if you support the recommendations of the planning staff of David, then I think we'll get public art, and the building will
I'm
be able to be built.
Excuse me, I thought you were done. I'm
Sorry.
sorry. Am I the only one passionate about the art above the? Obviously, there were 4 of us that cared enough. One way.
I'm more passionate about something to break it up. I don't know that necessarily needs to be art.
Could be, yeah, it could be color lines. I mean, built into the facade. It just doesn't all have to be one single. I guess that's where I'm at, is it doesn't have to be art. It just has to be more than a line down the middle.
Matt, were you going to say something?
Something, yeah.
I'll try again, but
We'll see if we approve this
Before you
time,
do,
yeah.
though, but can I make a comment about this,
Or-
which is,
yeah.
I think that most people, in my experience, spend a lot more time looking at the first and second floor, where even when they're driving by, and you could probably put almost anything on the upper floors of a building, and people probably wouldn't notice it, except for, from time to time, they may say, hey, look at those bikes up there, and how they get up there. It's this facade does have a lot of articulation, and while I don't like the idea of having a blank facade, I don't think this is a blank facade. So, so I would support going ahead, especially since I do know that not only is it expensive to put up there, but it's also difficult to maintain. And the last thing you want is something looking sloppy after 5 years.
And I mean, as I'm remembering this project that came before us, I kind of feel like we maybe, like it started out was very blank, and then when they came back twice or 3 times, I think, through a work session, and when they've added different elements over that time, because I actually like the project better now than I did for whatever reason when we were going through the process, now that we've taken distance. I mean, I agree, like I don't, but like the first time it was almost like a flat wall completely, and they added the different elements on the second level and the pipe up the top, through the middle and the window. I mean, I just feel it's different. It's not as bland as I remember it being. And so, and I get the struggles and the complications that they're going through. And I don't think materially that I agree that most people aren't going to notice it, especially if they're doing something nice in that big open space, which is what one of the standards is between the glass and the bottom floor. So I'll try one more time unless someone else wants to make a motion. But you can,
So I'd like to ask the applicant, you guys mentioned that you want to put other artwork in there. Tell me more about that. What's size, placement? Do you have ideas of that, or is it just, I mean, when I think of a metal piece of artwork like you're describing, I think of the ones over on Second East that are kind of small and in the park strip, and I don't know that matches this building, but I don't know what you guys are thinking.
My idea, okay, so we came up with a name for the building, which is called, we now have voted on it, Casa Milagro, which means house, miracle house. If this project gets built, it will be a miracle. And so, anyway, but it also gives hope to the people who live there, too, the name, and because of the culture of the Mexican people and the Hispanic people. And so, as I visualize the name, I try to visualize the name. What does it represent? I mean, what is a miracle? I mean, it's like, certainly we don't want to put praying hands on there. It's too religious. But the sun and the sun rays give light. And so to put a sun that represents, like a Mexican sun, you see a lot of artwork from Mexico that has, the sun on it.
Is it a big piece?
Yes,
going
it would
on
be.
The wall, or is it
Well,
on a
it would-
podium in the middle of the plaza, or up on the front?
My
I don't
idea
know.
originally was to put it, like on the top of the building. However, as we discussed it, the requirement was that we needed to have the artwork on the street level of the building. So it will be a large piece that will be on the street level of the building to kind of to give it, to represent our culture. And
will it be against the building or out in the park strip, or?
No, it'll be on the building.
Okay. And so then it's going to be on those first 2 floors?
So
The first
what
floor.
I mean, what if we and the applicant for
David,
Clark.
really quick question.
Go ahead.
David, is there a requirement for percentage of how much the public art has to, because it's such a long wall, or is it just
No,
anything?
no, and again, it was just, the requirement is just that it breaks up that wall. It didn't specify how big. It's a 25-foot wall for scale, approximately.
I mean, if I recall, I think the solution that's in front of us was kind of a marrying of our concern about what the public artwork would look like and our concern over a blank big facade there. I think the blank facade is a little bit of a subjective terms. I think that we've talked about how there is some distinction there, and there's reason for it to be minimalized on the windows. I feel more comfortable after hearing about this artwork about approving kind of this blank area as long as there's artwork on the front of the building. Again, it's kind of a subjective thing of what kind of artwork do you want on that building, and if they're feeling like it's going to be difficult to do what they did before, then I'm fine with them changing the art. I do remember us talking about just breaking up that wall a little bit more, though, so it looks different. You know, maybe is there a way to compromise and put a few more lines across that wall? Or I don't know. It just still does seem kind of blank.
Well, to Matt's point, I'm looking back at the old report here, and I don't know what was what at one point, but it definitely, the dark gray that's on this rendering was new, and I think the second rendition before the 3D people, then it carried with the 3D people, and it seems as though that is carried through to the final rendition, if I'm seeing that correctly. It's got so from the front, it's not. It is, to Matt's point, it has been improved pretty dramatically from the blank wall, if I'm seeing that correctly.
Yeah, in the very, very first. It was a work session like this came before us.
Because it's got the darker line on the top and the side. It's got the more varied colors on that center, the large center vertical thing. It even looks like you're maybe doing darker brick on the second floor there. So I don't know. I'm
gonna try this again.
All right, go ahead and try it, Matt.
And I'll take out. There's landscaping does not qualify. Let's just be clear about that. I move the Planning Commission take the following actions in relation to the proposed changes to Central Civic Senior Housing Project PLNSUB 2017-00370 and 2017-00525. That we deny changes proposed to the ground level blank wall, that we deny changes proposed to the public art requirements, and that we approve removing the 3D dimensional architectural elements from the facade.
Is it
Also
basically
artistic elements, not architectural
Yes, the
elements.
three-dimensional architectural elements such as bikes, walkers, and scooters from the main facade.
So you're making the staff recommendation?
Yes, I'm making a recommendation as staff. But landscaping, which is what the applicant kind of asked for a little bit, and I probably went too far with, making that will not qualify for public art. They need to do more than just landscaping.
Okay, motion by Matt. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Maureen, any further discussion on that?
I just have a question. So would that include things like if they want to do like lines or wavy lines, that would be okay under your motion?
Yeah, and I think they've got
something besides artwork.
The requirement, because we're denying they still have to incorporate public art along that concrete wall that is on that main floor between the glass and the main entry doorway. There has to be a public art element that will give the visual appearance and make it a pleasing environment for the people who are walking along the street.
Okay. Anything else? Okay, we'll vote. Sarah?
I can get behind that. Yes.
Brenda?
Yes.
Carolyn?
Agree.
Amy?
Yes.
Matt?
Yes.
Maureen?
Yes.
Clark?
Yes.
Andreas?
Yes.
There you go. Good luck.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I apologize. I have to be excused.
Okay. Thanks, Matt. All right. That is the end of our public hearings for the evening. Moving on to our other business, we have D2 zoning district amendments. Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm doing well.
Your shirt matches the color of the D2 zoning on your map.
Exactly why I purchased it. I walked through Target and saw it, and I just had to have it. So, so we're here to talk about proposed design standards in the D2, the Downtown Support District. If you look at the map here, the D2 zone kind of surrounds the west and south sides of downtown. It has some very highly trafficked streets and very visible sites. So State Street, Main Street, 4th, 5th, and 6th South, all West Temple as well, all gateways into downtown. And so, what happens on these streets, again, is very visible. And we're seeing you're starting to see a lot of growth in that neighborhood, especially seeing growth kind of move out of the Central 9th neighborhood and also from the Central Business District moving south. Currently, there are basically no development standards whatsoever other than height. So as of right now, if you wanted to build a 60-foot tall metal building with no windows, surrounded by parking, you could go for it. I don't know why you would, but you could do it. The Downtown Master Plan calls for improved design standards in all of our downtown zones, but this has become a priority. And the real catalyst was at the Sears site. Sears closed. It's a very visible site. It could really act as a real anchor for downtown, but without the right standards in place, it could certainly be detrimental to the growth in that neighborhood. The purpose of the text amendment is to create improved gateways into downtown, activate street frontages and pedestrian spaces, minimize impacts to low-density residential neighborhoods, which are very few, but we did try to recognize them. Require the use of durable exterior materials and preserve existing well-established land uses. These standards are based on a lot of research, best planning practices, as well as just implementing some of our existing design standards that we've used successfully in some of our transit area zones and the Sugar House Business District. So just to begin going through proposed design standards, I wanted to discuss those that affect primarily the ground floor of the structure. I know, as you well know, the ground floor has a huge impact on how the public interacts with the structure and in its ability to create an interesting urban street where people feel comfortable, where they want to spend time, they want to be that place. The standards include requiring minimum amount of ground floor glass of 40%, entrances at all street frontages, requiring active ground floor uses on all street frontages. Some streets we've identified as especially busier streets, so State Street, Main Street, 8th South, and 9th South, would require specific ground floor uses such as retail, restaurants, bars, something that would actually really truly activate that space, bring people into those areas. We know that retail is not going to work on every street in the D2 zone. We do not want to have empty storefronts lining streets. So those other streets that are in the D2 zone will still have to have a ground floor use, but something like office or residential use would comply. It could never be parking. So I think that was the biggest issue, is just getting rid of those developments. You pull up and it's a door and you see into a parking garage. Mid-block walkways would be required anywhere that is identified in an adopted master plan. The downtown master plan does indicate where those should be in this downtown area. Buildings should be set close to the street with obviously no parking between the building and sidewalk. However, allowing some setback if someone want to do some sort of active use, whether it's outdoor dining or art, or it's just a hangout spot, I guess. Staff was specifically asked during the public engagement period, and I'll go kind of through what we did on that later, but about the allowance of projecting or blade signs, which these signs are hung perpendicular to the street. They're not currently permitted in this zone. Staff believes that these pedestrian-oriented signs can really add a positive aesthetic to a neighborhood and to the streetscape, but as long as the size and number of the signs is controlled. So when we look at the structure as a whole, these standards kind of deal with scale and masking and those impacts they would have on the street, as well as those that they would have on surrounding areas. The first would to limit the length of a building to 200 feet, require articulation of the facade of the structure, meaning no blank walls over 15 feet, requiring a minimum amount of durable exterior building materials such as brick, stone, rock, or similar materials, and for the very first time in Salt Lake City, a minimum amount of upper floor glass of 25%. It's something it's been on the list, but it's never been implemented. All mechanical equipment service areas, loading docks would need to be screened, and then there'd also be specific standards for parking garages, standalone parking garages, just to minimize their impact on not only the street but to neighboring properties. So this is just kind of a quick overview of the changes that we would be adding. One kind of unique portion of this proposal is that we've included standards that address auto sales lots. Many of the city's largest auto sales lots are located in the D2 zone. In fact, there's over 30 acres in the downtown zone, the D2 zone along State Street and West Temple. It's kind of a unique land use. It comes with unique design requirements. These lots are very large. They are developed at a high cost, and they are it is very unlikely that they're going to go away in the foreseeable future. And they are a permitted use in the zone. With this proposal, we're not looking to adjust the land use tables. So we wanted to find standards that perhaps was a compromise to allow them to exist, but also have the ability to implement design standards. So first of all, sales and display buildings would need to comply with all proposed design standards, but auxiliary buildings such as car washes, repair shops, other buildings of that nature would not have to comply with those proposed design standards. Perimeter landscaping required when there are no buildings along that frontage, so any part of the street there that is not a building would need to be landscaped before there were vehicles, and then just the allowance of multiple buildings on a lot.
John, just to clarify how these would apply, they would apply to new buildings. So existing
Yes.
buildings that don't meet them aren't required to be brought up, but new buildings, and I think additions, if they're over a certain percentage of or size,
Right.
would have, the addition part has to comply, but.
And that would be with all, I should maybe mention at the beginning, this is all for new construction or for additions. So this, obviously, we wouldn't be requiring existing buildings to come into compliance with these standards. We've attempted to we conducted a fairly significant amount of public engagement. We met with stakeholders, business owners, business advisory board, the Main Street America Group, the Ballpark Community Council. Most recently, we had an open house last week. There was generally been a lot of support for this project. In fact, when I sent this first mailer out, one of the first emails I got was from an architect who said, "I can't believe it took this long for this to happen." So they knew it was coming. It just has taken some time to get there. However, at the open house, there were comments that were directed specifically at auto sales lots and whether or not they should have different design standards, whether there should be some sort of exemptions in place. All the comments I received felt that auto sales lots should not be excluded from the design standards. So I am interested in your thoughts on that subject. We will, as staff, is going to continue to analyze that particular issue as we kind of finalize our draft as well. So I'd love to hear any feedback, any questions, any comments that you may have.
Thanks, John. You said that the length of the building was 200 feet. Is that would be the maximum length?
That number was taken from the transit station area, was also at 200 feet.
Okay. And you restricted the uses for the main floor to what streets again? So what streets would be I don't want to go back.
So it was State Street, Main Street, 800 South, and 900 South. And those would be those that have to have kind of an extra, that it has to have an active ground use that is actually something that's going to attract people. And that's a standard that we've used in other zones, including the Sugar House Business District.
Okay.
And if there are other streets you want to add or take off, I'd be happy to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, maybe. And then, yeah, I would, on the auto thing, that's tough because I kind of don't want to be lenient either, because I would like the appearance of the auto stores to be gone, even if they're still there. And I remember I moved to Portland for a brief period, and I saw this car dealership that was totally inside. I don't know if it was like a super fancy one. I don't even remember, but it was just like, oh, you can do that. Like, that's kind of cool. But obviously that would be something over a long period of time as they remodel and change things. But it seems like we should probably set the standard pretty high so that when that does happen, it happens correctly. So I guess that's where I would kind of lean, would be to making that a little more strict.
Okay. I think it's one reason why I want to make sure that those main buildings were pulled to the street, which is not the normal development pattern for a car lot. So I feel like we're probably going to get some pushback just asking for that as well, in the sense normally they want to be in the middle, so you got to walk through all their cars before you get to the middle. But we definitely still want to look at that a little
How would
further.
that, because that's a little strange too, because they often occupy like a whole block or like half a block. So even if they're on the street, they're going to be over to one side, and then the rest of it is going to be a parking lot.
Right. I mean, Ken Garf's right, adjacent to us, and it's kind of a similar option. If you go down State Street, it is buildings along the street, but behind that, you do have an open parking lot.
Yeah.
It is permitted, so they would be able to continue to do that. Even if the buildings are pushed forward as a permitted use, I mean, you have to allow the storage of vehicles, so.
Yeah. Any other thoughts?
So I have kind of a series of questions.
Yes.
John perks up. Okay.
More.
So we talked about the window percentage. One of the things that we noticed, or that I noticed in the Sugar House Business District, is that just blanketing at 40%, sometimes then windows are put in places that are not conducive to activating pedestrians. So we've had a number of buildings that put the windows way up top and 5 feet, so they put them up at 6 or 7 feet, and that doesn't activate any pedestrian use. And one of the things in talking with Nick over the years was that, well, that's what the ordinance says, 40% is. This may be an opportunity to look at how to better define, not necessarily like you have to have a window here, 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 but that the objective of that 40% window placement is to activate pedestrian interest. And you're not going to accomplish that if you put a line of windows up at the
Right.
top of your first floor.
One thing, as I was walking down here today, I thought I should have given you guys something to give you a little more context. I gave you the table with the standards. Along with the table in the ordinance, it kind of explains what it means when we say ground floor glass. So example, ground floor glass means that you have to have 40% between 3 and 8 feet above the ground. And so it would require that glass to be in the center, so it would activate
that was definitely one of my
so
feedbacks.
I
was
apologize.
that
I really thought about it as I got down here.
I already fixed it, is that it was something that would activate that. Then I just had a question when you said there would be entrances on all frontage.
Mhm.
Would this, if the building is 200 feet long, would you then, by ordinance, you could have one entrance for 200 feet?
Yes. So as of right now, you're not required to have any doors on the street. In this case, some zones have that you just have to have a door on the street, and there's some zones that have indicated that you need to have a door every 40 feet, for example, in the TSA. I know in the Sugar House Business District, they're looking between 30 and 40. So it wasn't added on there as something, but it is something I'd be happy to look at. If you wanted to have a specific number.
So much interested in that one door, in a door exactly, but if we have 200 feet, then does this trigger that same kind of ordinance that you can only 15 feet of blank, and then you have to do something to break it up? Or does that apply here? 15 feet of a blank wall.
So that would be anywhere along the street facade. So when you say articulation or blank walls, it can be, the building can actually move back and forth. Materials could change.
I want to make sure we don't get a door and then 200 feet of nothing that's interesting or activating, that you just walk by and you think, "Whoa, I'm not welcome there. Oh, that's not interesting to
And
be
maybe
walking in
glass
front of."
wouldn't be, okay.
So it doesn't have to be a door per se. I was just wondering if there was, a door so many feet, but that if you can have one door for a 200-foot long building, I would want to ensure that there were other elements that were a plus there. And I am on Blade sides. When I read that, I totally agreed with the size and the limitations, and I think that they're great. So I totally approve of that. One of the things that I wanted to comment on was the elimination of a design review process if you met so much affordable, 20% affordable.
Yes.
So I feel like the elimination of the design review is a pretty big incentive, because I get we're trying to incentivize to do that, but I don't know that it matched.
Okay.
I would actually encourage and strongly support that being 30%.
Okay.
For that kind of a gift of eliminating the design review. And I think 20% affordability is peanuts, really. If you're looking at a 500, unit building, that I just didn't feel like that was in line with what the incentive was. They should be giving a little
I completely
bit
understand.
more. So those are the things that really stood out to me.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner.
I would be hoping that we could provide some other incentive rather than not having design review. Because it's often the affordable housing that has budgetary constraints such that design kind of falls off the table. So, so I would not go along with that really at all. Because if we could find some other way of incentivizing affordable housing, maybe more height as of right, or something else. Because the design part is actually, design review for that kind of project may be more important than it is for market rate.
Appreciate that. And we have been looking, obviously, it's a tough situation, and there's not as many carrots out there as we would like, but I appreciate that, and I'll look into that more.
Sarah, Carolyn, Maureen? Anything?
I read through it. I think it looks great. I think anything else I would have brought up has been brought up by other commissioners so far. So
I really appreciate your work on this, because I would agree, like, getting these design standards in the D2 is super valuable, and frankly anything we do is
flash floods.
Yeah. In fact, is there anything in here that will address flash floods?
No, however, no.
Gutters.
No, I think that's great. Is there anything else that do you need anything more specific from us, or you just need
No,
some
I just
general
wanted to
feedback?
make sure that it seems like people are pretty comfortable with the direction we're heading. It's just with a few things we can look into, and the public has generally been just as receptive to that, besides the auto sales issue, which I think is definitely something you want to dig into a little bit further before we come back to you guys.
Are there models in other cities that have been more aggressive with auto dealers in the downtown area that perhaps we could use as a model, or?
It's tough. Most cities don't necessarily have them right downtown.
Yeah.
You know, they've the value of the property has gotten to the point where they've been pushed out more into the periphery.
Right.
And those, you know, when you get really, really high end and you're in New York or somewhere, that all of a sudden you have a parking garage instead of a big parking lot. So, but to force it is a little bit tougher. It doesn't mean that we can't look into it a little bit deeper and see what we can do.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your work.
Yep. Thank you, guys.
All right. Our last agenda item, Inland Port text amendments by, our fearless leader, Nick.
Yeah, this will take me a minute to get this loaded because it's a separate presentation. But we wanted to brief the Planning Commission on a couple of things related to the Inland Port, particularly because of some of the time restrictions and requirements that were placed upon us by the state legislature, and the need for us to respond in what is an unusual fashion. So that's what we're here to talk about. I kind of wanted to go back a little bit and describe a little bit and give you some basic information, not just about what an inland port is, but also what the bill said, so that you are aware of it. Because I think a lot of people don't fully understand what was in the bill. So first off, just start with an inland port, and these are general kinds of definitions, but they're basically intermodal facilities that move things around. They move goods in and out, freights from different modes, all different modes, whether it's train, truck, or plane. They're commonly referred to, they have lots of different names. They're listed there: dry port, global trade port, logistics park, intermodal facility. One of the ideas behind the inland port is to get goods through log jams at seaports that are created because of the limited capacity for customs at those locations. So basically what would happen is that this would allow ships to be unloaded quicker, and instead of having to take up space at Long Beach or LA or wherever, those trains can move out quicker, and they go straight to the inland port where the customs office is, and that's where they clear all of that fun federal stuff. So the functions, they're rail lines and they basically transfer goods, like I said. This is kind of some pictures of some similar facilities. They tend to have large cranes warehousing and distribution centers kind of surround them. There's other light manufacturing facilities because they can benefit from light assembly of goods that are produced elsewhere. There's also movement of bulk goods through these types of facilities, and that gets to some of the temporary storage items. There are some benefits and there are some drawbacks, obviously. And this is the focus of what we're really looking at this point are the drawbacks and the impacts. Those include not just environmental, but also to city services and infrastructure and things like that. And so just to list those, obviously air quality, water quality, habitat degradation, particularly in this location and in our northwest quadrant area of our city. These are examples of other parks. This is a logistics park outside of Kansas City. I believe it's about 30 or 40 miles outside of Kansas City. You kind of have a basic site plan and the aerial that shows what goes on there. There is some bulk storage, outdoor bulk storage that does occur at this facility. You can kind of see that in that gray area, or in the aerial there's kind of some brown unfinished product or areas on the ground. Similar one in Illinois, where you can see that this one has, I don't even want to begin to imagine how many miles of rail line and stuff is in this facility, but it's clearly very large. One of the interesting things about most of these ports is that they generally have occupied land that was already typically had a government use on them prior. So this particular one was associated with the U.S. Army base, one in San Antonio, Air Force Base, et cetera. And so this is where we are a little bit more unique. I think the Kansas City one is mostly private property, but Salt Lake City's area is almost exclusively privately owned land. So this bill that was passed in the special session in July, it was HB 2001. We have the code citations in here, which you can look at online now, and it's a little bit easier to follow than the actual bill version of it. But basically, it told the city, not just city, Salt Lake, but also West Valley City and Salt Lake County, that we have to update our zoning ordinance to allow inland port uses by December 31st of 2018. If we don't, then we are basically essentially waiving our right to regulate inland port uses, and we have to treat them as permitted. So we'll get to some of the problems with that in our ordinance. Mainly the definition of what an inland port use is very broadly defined, and I think it could reasonably be interpreted to mean just about any use. We also cannot prohibit temporary natural resource storage or the storage of natural resources in our inland port. And I think we can read between the lines about what that is aimed at. But some interesting things also came about in the bill, in that there were some added objectives for the Inland Port Authority, which include environmental regulations. And so that's really what we are looking at right now as the city, is what environmental regulations and standards can we utilize in our zoning ordinance to address some of the impacts. Let's kind of start by showing what the Inland Port Authority jurisdictional lands actually are. This changed during the special session. So those of you who are familiar with our Northwest Quadrant Plan, and up in the upper left-hand corner of this map, you can see the dotted black line. That is the city boundary. The shaded blue areas are the inland port lands, and the space between the shaded blue and the black line up on the screen on the left, up in the left corner, are those areas that the Northwest Quadrant Master Plan and our previous zoning activities identified as essentially not undevelopable areas. Those areas that we're preserving because of their unique nature, the wetlands, the wildlife habitat, and the agricultural uses and things like that that are existing in that area. And so this the change in the bill took those out of the jurisdictional land. They used to extend all the way up to the city boundary. So that, that's one of the better parts, well, maybe one of the only better parts of the bill. But the other section, it modified some of the area on the southern part. You can kind of see right in the middle of where the interstates and Bangor Highway meet, there's that big kind of orange-yellow area. Just towards the bottom of the screen on there, that area used to also be in the inland port jurisdictional lands, and so that was taken out as well. Bunch of things that the bill did relating to what's called the tax differential and things like that, and what the city can collect and how we provide services. Those are really outside of what we are discussing as a planning staff. That doesn't mean that they're not any less important to the city. It's something that we in the planning division can't really address or do anything about, and we're probably the wrong group to do something about. So other people in the city are leading a charge on that. So there's basically 15 different policies and objectives in the Inland Port Bill. And the reason why these are important is because when we look at the inland port use and definitions and our whatever zoning standards we come up with, they have to basically relate to these policies and objectives. So I pulled out some of and kind of simplified some of the items that relate directly to zoning, and these are what we're looking at. So the first one up there, respect, maintain sensitivity to the unique natural environment in the proximity to the area, improve air quality, minimize resource use, respect existing land use and other agreements. That's important because the city in the Planning Commission made some zoning changes earlier of this year before the regular legislative session, where we entered into some development agreements with the two major property owners that are north of I-80. And so at least this acknowledges that, and any zoning changes we made would also have to acknowledge those development agreements. Promote and encourage development of inland port lands. Clearly our zoning is already aimed at doing that. Support and promote land uses that generate economic development, facilitate a hub for trading, and support inland port uses. And the bill specifically lists warehouse, light manufacturing, and distribution as those uses. So like I said, our task is really to develop some zoning regulations to respond to the bill. We need to allow inland port uses, and this is where we kind of get thrown for a loop a little bit, is that the jurisdictional lands include lands that are within 8 different zoning districts. Not all of them allow light manufacturing, warehouse, distribution. So that's what we're tasked with. That's why we need to make some changes. But the bill also says that we can allow those inland port uses with standards that are basically up to the city to come up with. So that's what we're doing.
Nick, really quick on that
Yeah.
one. Are you then looking at why in those 8 districts the inland port is not an allowable use? What the reasoning for that is?
I'm gonna get to that in a little bit here. So so this map shows basically, I think the important thing about this is intended to show the 8 different zoning districts. The part that's not on here is there's also 6 different overlays that apply to this area. So it's actually a very complicated zoning problem that we've been tasked to do, and we basically have less than a month to do it. In fact, we really have about a week. We have 10 days to get it done. So on our end, not on the Planning Commission's end, but on our end. And so the intent of this is to show where those are. It may be that long term that some of these areas get rezoned to M1, given the reality, but the way that map amendments are working in Salt Lake City and negotiating with property owners and everything else, we don't feel like we have the time to do that and meet the December 31st deadline right now. So we're going to get to our approach in a minute, but I wanted to go over a few of the other changes. Appeals, so there were some significant changes to the appeals section of this. However, it didn't change the fact that The Inland Port Appeal Panel has the authority to basically decide which city standards apply and which ones don't. And they can overrule our land use decisions based on 3 different things, which are coming up in a different slide. So the big change is that it has to go through our city approval process first. I don't know that that really does much from an outcome perspective, because all it does is means that if the planning commission makes a decision on something, it goes to the appeals hearing officer, and they can decide, just like they do now. They review the record and make sure that the planning commission made essentially a legally defensible decision. Staff decision, they're actually de novo because there's no public hearing when we make staff level decisions. These are oftentimes even applying a zoning ordinance to a building permit. This is where we do get these types of things appealed. More than likely, the thing that's going to be appealed, the staff level decision that would more than likely be appealed would be something along the lines of whether or not a use is actually an inland port use or not. So those would go to the hearing officer first, and then they'd go to the Inland Port Authority, who gets to actually make the decision. But the bill changed some things about the appeals that we think we can maybe use to our advantage as a city a little bit. The big thing is that an applicant, so a land use applicant, that's somebody who's applied to do something on an inland port land, they need to submit to the appeals panel information and documentation about how they meet or exceed applicable state or federal regulations. So that includes air quality, water quality, etc. They need to list any potential environmental impact and what mitigation measures, including what technology allows them, or what technology is being used to help mitigate those impacts. They need to provide a list of all, and this is different than what we're used to as a conditional use, all potential impacts on abutting properties. The conditional use standard in our ordinance is that it has to be an adverse impact, and it's about reducing it. There's not really any indication in this bill about what standard that appeals panel would be required or would use to determine what to do with an impact if it's identified. Potential impacts to migratory bird production areas. And then this is one of the troubling parts of it. Municipal regulations that the applicant will be unable to comply with, and if there are alternative methods to achieve the intent of those municipal regulations. So that statement basically means if you can't comply with a standard that the city has adopted, tell us why, and we'll make a decision on whether or not we think there's other alternatives, or whether you even have to. So it does require a public hearing and notice of the public hearing. Before, no public hearing was required. That panel could just make a decision whenever they want. They could appoint someone to make the decisions. In fact, the old bill didn't even require notice to the city about whether or not they were going to be hearing an appeal, or they received an appeal, or anything like that. The panel can affirm a decision, but they can also overturn the decision, and some of these are pretty typical, but if it's contrary to the policies and objectives of the inland port, so that's get back to those 15 types of, the list of 15 things. If the city imposes conditions that unreasonably impair or essentially prohibit an inland port use, or if it's arbitrary, capricious, or illegal, which is basically our standard at the city level. So our approach, and we think that this is really the only way that we could accomplish this task, is to create a use overlay. So what that means is that it would take whatever those uses are, it more than likely is going to be the M1 land use table, as listed, whether permitted or conditional, and apply them to the inland port area. We feel like we don't need to, we're going to reference the map that's actually adopted by the state legislature, so it's not a map amendment for us. We're referring to that requirement. What we're trying to figure out is what do we do in, say, for example, the CG zone where those uses aren't allowed. If it's not allowed in the underlying zone, should it be permitted or conditional? What the process is. Those are the types of things that we are still trying to figure out. And that gets the approval process. What additional standards of review are required, if any? Do our existing standards for conditional use already cover this stuff or not? And then what submittal requirements do we need as a city to be able to make a determination as to whether what the impacts are and whether or not, and how they might be mitigated. Timeline, this is probably completely unreadable. But basically we have had a couple of public meetings. We were at the Glendale Community Council last week. We had a community workshop, open house on Monday night. We have another one tomorrow night. We'll follow those up. We're also doing online engagement. We'll follow that up with another community meeting. I believe it's on September 6th. And then we'll have 2 public hearings with the Planning Commission, September 12th and September 26th. And then we will transmit everything to the City Council so that they have time to do whatever they feel like they need to do. Because essentially, even though the bill says December 31st, we actually only have until like December 9th, because that's the last City Council meeting of the year, unless they need to schedule an emergency meeting. So a couple other things that we are looking at, just so everybody is aware. The Land Use and Development Management Act, which essentially is the state law that lets us do zoning. It includes objectives for land use regulations, and there's a couple of things in there that we think that we can use to help the city achieve our goals that we outlined in the Northwest Quadrant Master Plan for this area and accommodate an inland port. Clearly, the ones you're familiar with, land use and buildings, but the state law actually allows us to use zoning to deal with energy efficiency, light and air access, air quality, transportation. The air quality one is something I don't know if local jurisdictions have done much with, so it's going to be a little interesting because we have to balance that out with some of the other regulatory agencies at the state and federal level, because obviously they're going to preempt anything that we do by their own laws. But just to go over some of the key issues, obviously not all zoning districts, like I said, allow the inland port uses. We have the existing development agreements, which are essentially vested vested to the ordinance that was in place at the time and identified in that development agreement. Not all inland port uses are going to create impacts. That's something that I think is a reality, but we want to make sure that those that are going to create an impact, that we treat them, and we have a review process to help mitigate those impacts the best we possibly can. The picture kind of shows what's already permitted and built. This is actually in Salt Lake City in an inland port jurisdictional land, a development that's relatively new, but it was a permitted use. The questions that we're kind of asking ourselves as we go through this, how do we address the uses that are not otherwise permitted in underlying zones? What if a use comes in that doesn't want to be an inland port use? How do we deal with that, but they're in the land? So for example, someone building a warehouse of whatever that was going to build it anyway, are they really an inland port use if they're already going to be there? What do we need in order to determine what the impacts are? What kind of studies, research, et cetera, which is going to kind of raise the bar for some of these uses, I think, in the city. Do we need expanded conditional use standards? This is actually this is a conditional use that's in Salt Lake City that you can, it's a metal recycling, and you can kind of see over time what's happened with it. And when you look at the left-hand side of the picture, that's when it was originally built, probably 30 or 40 years ago. There really weren't any kind of standards in place or anything like that. And as you move over towards the right, you start seeing solid surfaces for the storage and movement of the vehicles on the site to help reduce the dust, water, pollution, et cetera. There's actually an indoor sorting building so that also helps reduce the air quality impacts for those types of facilities. And so you start to see that over time, not just zoning requirements, but also there's probably some other clean air requirements, clean water requirements. You can actually see that kind of holding pond that's in the middle there, where they can kind of store some of the liquids that come out of. I mean, this facility does a lot of recycling of junk vehicles and things like that, and so clearly there's all kinds of liquids and things like that are in those old vehicles that basically get sorted and taken care of and disposed of properly, instead of just dumped on the ground and let absorb into our water supplies and our groundwater. Why didn't we take the other approaches? Like I said, the biggest thing is timing. We don't think that we could have accomplished this by taking other approaches, whether it's writing a new zoning district, remapping it, and other things. We just think that there were too many potential traps in that process to do it. We also have to think about staff resource, because not only do we have to get this done, but we have to get the other, I think we're at 290 active applications that we are working on right now. And so we have to keep those moving along. A lot of people don't realize that some of those applications have time processing requirements, not just in our ordinance, but in state law too. So we can't really let those things slide. Some of them will be impacted. Some of them are being delayed a little bit. And that's just the reality of what we are. All city-initiated projects are impacted by this and currently delayed. We're taking the very unusual step of, over the next 2 weeks, sequestering our staff to work on this, because it's the only way we can get it done. So pretty big impact to what we're doing otherwise as a planning division as well. Like I said earlier, longer term, we may look at rezoning all of the lands to M1 to help reduce some of the
So
issues.
explain that one to me a little more. I think I have the answer, but it makes sense that it all becomes the same zone. Is it because it's in so many property owners' hands that you can't just do a blanket
Yeah, so the
change right now?
Yeah, because basically under state code, we have certain noticing requirements to those property owners. They have the ability to protest and things like that, and it just adds so much, but like I said, potential traps. It doesn't mean they're gonna happen, but they can. And when we're kind of mandated something like this, we kind of need, we feel we need to respond in the most time sensitive way that we possibly can.
So does the M1 zone, or would this overlay preclude housing being built in this area?
The M1 zone does. Most of this area, the airport overlay actually prohibits housing regardless of the zone. So for example, CG zone does allow housing, but because the airport, the proximity of the airport in that location, it wouldn't. So that. The one thing I didn't mention is that like I said, this would only be focused on the use. So all of the underlying bulk requirements of those other zones would still come into play. So for example, in the CG zone, that height requirement is still there. Those setbacks are still there. We're not adding additional things. We're not trying to address that at this time because it's just too much. Wanted to give you guys a little bit heads up about what we're hearing already. I mean, a lot of these things we've already known going in. Clearly, the biggest impact and concern that the city has, and I think a lot of, in fact, I would say just about everyone in the community has, is air quality and how that relates to land use. Some of the things that we've identified, these are examples of what other places have done in zoning ordinances. For example, they may require air quality mitigation, impact study and mitigation report. So that may say, what is it that you are actually putting into the air, whether it's, we use the example here of fugitive dust, because that's something that a lot of people don't think about, but it does create quite a bit of air pollution. And it's also, not that I'm going to be hesitant to say this, but I'll say it anyway. Not that we don't expect there to be things like coal storage on this site, because it just doesn't make economic sense to unload it and then reload it here. But that is one of those uses that does create a lot of air pollution in that process. What happens in, for example, the Port of Long Beach, all of that is contained inside buildings and inside of enclosed conveyor belts until it gets to the ship. That's the only spot where the coal is actually exposed to the outdoors. Obviously, it arrives in the train cars and usually uncovered. That's just wanted to use that as an example. So things like requiring paved working yards and things like that, wind screens, a lot of materials, bulk materials can have water suppressants. There are chemical suppressants, but that has a catch-22 with water quality, and also potentially air quality if during the application of those chemicals are spreading off the site. Like I said, controlling loading and unloading operations, whether it's in enclosed buildings or on solid surfaces, obviously certain vending equipment, and enclosed types of storage. So believe it or not, there actually are full-on storage sheds for coal that you wouldn't believe the massive size of those. But also that's what grain silos are for and things like that, to help reduce those kinds of impacts from dust. Water quality is the other major concern that we're hearing. This is another example of stormwater mitigation plans that we might require to contain the stormwater and any foreign material that it may take into there, particularly when you have yards with lots of vehicles moving around and things like that. That's a big thing. We already require that as the water supplier and the manager of stormwater in Salt Lake City. Our Public Utilities Department is required to comply with Clean Water Act. And so they already are requiring some of these things. And if that's the case, if we're already requiring something as a city, we don't feel it's necessary to put it into our zoning ordinance as well. But wanted to give some examples of what we might be required to be submitted so that we can get that report to Public Utilities so they can tell us if it complies with the Clean Water Act or not. Other issues, and this doesn't necessarily mean to diminish these. We just haven't gotten to researching these types of things at the moment. But obviously transportation impacts are huge. The noise impacts are also important, particularly the closer you get to sensitive lands and sensitive uses, and energy use and efficiency. So that gets back to the state code about how are we going to be willing as a city to start looking at energy consumption and alternative modes on some of these buildings and uses that might use above whatever the norm is, if we can figure that out. But those are the types of things that we're looking at. Like I said, we are still very early. In fact, we only have a list of things that we want to consider in our ordinance right now. And next week, we hit it hard and heavy and start writing an ordinance, which is going to be a pretty interesting thing, because normally writing a draft ordinance like this would probably take us 4 to 6 months, and we have 10 days to do it. So there's going to be some grumpy planners in the city over the next few weeks.
So the next two agendas are completely this. We have nothing else.
Now, there's some other things on there. We do anticipate that the public hearings will be pretty lengthy, so we're trying to keep those meetings focused on as much time as necessary on these so that the planning commission can hear what people are saying. We will also provide a full report on every comment that we're getting. So what we plan on doing is summarize or kind of categorizing those comments. If it's something that we feel or that legally we can do as a city, we'll indicate that. If it's something that we have to defer to the state to or the federal government to or some other, the health department or some other agency, we'll indicate that as well so that people know what we can and can't do as a city.
Is the state going to buy the land for the port? That seems like an extensive centerpiece of this project.
Right. That is something that ultimately I think would be up to the Port Authority Board. I don't know the answer to that.
Nick, I have to run right at this moment, and I apologize.
You're good.
But thank you so much for this, and thank you so much for the staff time and resource, particularly on the air quality and water quality, because I share that concern with the community. It's an incredible concern going into this. So I appreciate all the time and energy you're spending on that, and look forward to how we're going to finagle that to our advantage as best we possibly can.
Thank you. I will kind of, I mean, other people have questions, that's fine, but I will say, kind of as my closing statement, I think one of our goals and purposes for doing this is that we do not want to be the group that is selling out our community values for the Inland Port. We want to make it very clear on record what we stand for and what is important to us, and that we care about our community's health, and that we think that through our Northwest Quadrant plan that we have a very solid plan to see this Inland Port happen and help protect our resources, our environment, and those things that we hold dear to our core as a city. We fully recognize that there will likely be some response from the Port Authority Board or the state legislature, but we're comfortable saying, you know what, we're going to fight for this, and we're going to let those agencies be the people that tell our city that whether or not they care or not about the environment.
I have one more question, which is that manufacturing areas and storage areas within the city limits of Salt Lake are rather limited, and considering this is our major big area that we allow this kind of thing to happen. And do we see that the Inland Port is actually going to limit our ability to have economic development of other facilities that where the port itself might not be of any interest at all to someone?
I don't know the answer to that.
I mean, is that something we might consider? I mean, certainly it's not that something has to be a land use for the Inland Port. I mean, that would be a concern that I would have, that I hope you are able to address.
Yeah, I think that gets to one of those questions that we have is, you know, how do we treat something that doesn't want to be an Inland Port use, that still wants to be in this area? And, you know, how do we apply some level of fairness to that, but also maybe not, if they're not going to be an Inland Port use and not subject to those types of things, you know, how are we going to proceed as a city in that regard? Those are one of the questions we have, and we'll try to figure it out.
You got a good task ahead of you.
Good luck with that.
I think my biggest thought, I mean, I live probably closer to this than, I don't know, maybe Carol lives closer or something, but I drive past the train tracks every day, and I'm frequently impeded by those trains, and I'm wondering how the current train system connects into this port and what the impacts on that train traffic will be. I certainly don't think it's that big of a deal to have trains coming through the city like they are, but I do think that there should be more more building or more construction or more transportation that allows for free movement of vehicles and pedestrians as well as trains, especially if we're going to get more trains.
Absolutely, and I know that our transportation division is looking into all of those things and working not just with, you know, because that is a global issue, and we have it, whether we have an Inland Port or not, we have that issue, right? And so I think we're trying to work on what kinds of funds are available to help address that, whether it's overpasses and underpasses and things like that, so that we're not seeing that. But questions? I'm done if there's no more.
Mari.
I guess we're adjourned.
Thank you.